い全国大会目指して頑張ってみたいかあの若い頃の気持ちを取り戻せたら良いのにもしよろしければ行きましょうか願いが叶う街にそう時間楽しい年に行くもしかして知ってるのやのととすがり出会うやなものって答えそうかもしれない知りて素晴らしいものそれは救いの旅路だ我々のはすべてをいてこれは愛の告白願って忘れましょう成長の苦悩世界を恋になり雨のアウハウと叫んで気合い入れよう恋の願うの今日の京都ベケーション京都
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station's Kyoto Vacation, an anime podcast brought to you by Sean Chapman
and Jonathan Lack.
We are here to kick back, relax, and talk about some anime this week on the show. We are hanging out in the airport waiting to end our Kyoto Vacation, our very, very long, protracted Kyoto Vacation, but we are not ready, Jonathan, to end the fun yet. We have finished Violet Evergarden, which was our original plan for this vacation forever ago. That plan went out the window like months ago at this point, so we have added on. We're going to have 2 additional episodes. Next week will be the true final episode, an epilogue looking back on our historic vacation in Kyoto. But today we've got one last series to talk about, a series very near and dear to my heart that I really loved revisiting. This is Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid Seasons 1 and 2, which we're covering for 2 main reasons. One, it's just nice to go, look at a fun slice of life moe show that intentionally harkens back to the early KyoAni stuff. But 2, this is the last series directed by Takemoto Yasuhiro, who directed Season 1 before his death in the arson attack. And then Season 2 is the first series released by KyoAni after the arson attack, with Ishihara Tatsuya taking over directorial duty. So as we got deeper into the Kyoto Vacation, it felt like it would be a shame not to take a look at this show, both because it's fun, but also it has a really unique place in the history of the studio.
Yes, and, I think Takemoto Yasuhiro, I think if we have any regret as we sit here in the airport about what didn't we get to do in Kyoto, I think there are a couple of shows by him that, we didn't get to do as deep a dive on him as we did on Ishihara Tatsuya, who I think we covered everything he directed at KyoAni, right?
Yes, more or less, if you're not counting like the cult video from the 80s, which was his directorial debut for the Happy Cult or whatever it was called. But yes, his main series, we covered them all.
And there are a couple of Takemoto series we missed, although we saw a lot of his individual episodes. And, he and Ishihara are equally significant directors. Yeah. They are the first 2 KyoAni series directors. They are both geniuses. And they are very different directors, even though I think, they came from the same studio, as you see in the 2 seasons of Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, which is a show I really liked. I think I loved it in Season 1. I think I liked it a little less in Season 2, which I found a bit more hit or miss. And I think there's an interesting thing to talk about with kind of tone and the different styles of the directors, and some of this is just down to personal preference. But it makes for a fascinating conversation as we sit here in the airport waiting for our flight to board. We rode the train from Kyoto back to the Narita airport in Tokyo. We watched the show on the way, and now we're sitting here, just waiting to board and talk about Miss Kobayashi's Maid Dragon.
Yes, or Dragon Maid, a very finicky title that I talked to you about this, Jonathan, off the air when we did a podcast recording last week, that I did not realize until late stages into making my notes, and having already finished Season 1, that the official English title for the show is, in fact, Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, because I had always just assumed in my head it was Miss Kobayashi's Maid Dragon.
Yeah, I thought you were being a totally insufferable weeb just every time, like, no, it's Maid Dragon, god damn it. And I was like, Sean, it's called Dragon Maid in the US, and it's fine. If you want to call it Maid Dragon, I'm not going to stop you. But I thought you were just being, like, obstinate about it.
No, I legitimately just, even though I had been looking at the English title constantly, in my head I just swapped the words because that's, of course, the order in Japanese is Maid Dragon, because you squash the D's together. But yes, it is.
As
it
they
is
do on the
Dragon
show
Maid.
all the time.
Yeah.
Hey-o! That's a joke about all the boob shots.
There you go. Thank you. Yes, they're world class.
I also think they're significantly bigger than D's, based on what we see from Ilulu and from Lukoa-san.
Yes. And we will get into all of that and more. But yes, this is Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, or Maid Dragon. We're probably going to say it both ways constantly throughout this podcast. But as you kind of said a little bit earlier, Jonathan, that it's interesting to be able to look at these two seasons, because I think I feel similar to you, that I really love season 1. I think season 1 is a fascinating show that exists in this very interesting, complicated tonal space that is really building off of a lot of things that Takemoto Yasuhiro did in Lucky Star and Hyoka, in particular, for the stuff that we've covered. And it is just a really weird, interesting, strange show. And then the second season, is still very good. I don't think it's quite as good, though I do think it's admirable just how much of the essence of the show Ishihara is able to preserve, even though obviously it's, because I think the first season is so peculiar and kind of singular, that any director trying to sort of take that on has a really huge task in front of them. And there are some moments in some of the key episodes, like the last episode of the second season, that I think Ishihara Tatsuya absolutely captures some of the essential energy of the series. But overall, inevitably the second season is going to feel fairly different. And it's just very fascinating to look at those two things juxtaposed right next to each other. But it also, the second season, thinking of it as the first thing that they released post the, and the predominant amount of work of it was done after the arson attack. What a triumphant work it is from that perspective, because you would never, ever be able to tell that something so horrible happened to this studio and they lost so many people just by looking at that season.
Exactly. And, I have my criticisms of season 2, and I'm not going to hold back on those, because I think that would be patronizing in its own weird way.
Yeah.
But, it is a miracle it exists. It is a miracle that it looks every bit as good as every other KyoAni show. It has some things, because Ishihara Tatsuya goes a little bit more on the madcap side of things, it has some crazy Nichijou-style sequences. And, the idea that this studio suffered, the worst thing that has ever happened to an animation studio in Japan, and came out and made this, and the fact that it's even coherent, is let alone that there are things to criticize, I think, are high level things. They're not anything on the level of the production or the voice acting or any of that stuff. It is a miracle, and it is a testament to the resiliency of this team that Kyoto Animation, and I think this goes back to stuff we talked about in the very first episode when we got to Kyoto a year ago, about the studio culture that they have built over decades, that clearly can survive something like the arson attack is amazing, and is a testament to, it shouldn't have to survive something like that, but the fact that it has is miraculous, and speaks to what a great group of people and an institution that has been built, which is a really tricky fucking thing to do.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just, this series, as bizarre of a series as it is, because it is just a weird show, it is such in its own way, a testament to everything that Kyoto Animation is. It's just very cool and very weird. So let's go ahead and get into it. Let's get into the history section here. Because this is a little bit of a throwback in multiple different ways. It's a little bit more similar to the early KyoAni series we talked about in terms of its production stuff. So it is based on a manga, Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, which was created by the mangaka known as Cool Kyo Shinja, which if you translate that nom de plume, means believer in the faith of cool, is probably the best way to try to translate it. It's very clearly a doujin-style name that guy has just kind of held on to the whole time. Cool Kyo Shinja, as the nom de plume would imply, started as a mangaka in the doujin scene in the 2000s, as most of these, back when we covered all of our 2000s era ones where they were mostly adapting manga at KyoAni, very much comes from that same sort of place. He first started really getting noticed outside of the doujin scene in 2011 when he self-published a 4-koma rom-com web manga called I Can't Understand What My Husband Is Saying.
That's a great name for a rom-com.
Yes, exactly. And Cool Kyoshinja released that manga on their own website in places like Twitter and Pixiv and places like that. And then it was simultaneously published by the publishing company Ichijinsha, which released it ultimately in 5 different collected tankobon volumes from 2011 to 2015. In 2012, Cool Kyoshinja began the series Komori-san Can't Decline, which was published in the Manga Time Original Magazine. So that was the first one published in a regular manga magazine. And then in 2013, they began publishing Kobayashi-san no Maid Dragon, or Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. In the Gekkan Action magazine is where that was published. This began the unusual situation where Cool Kyoshinja had those 3 series ongoing for multiple years at the same time. So there was this period in the early 2010s where they were weirdly prolific with a lot of different series, because all 3 of those series also ended up being adapted into anime. I Can't Understand What My Husband Is Saying, which I did watch that anime when it originally aired. That was adapted into 2 seasons of 5-minute shorts, so it's just they're sort of quick little episodes. And those were made by the anime company 7 in 2014. Komori-san Can't Decline was adapted into a season of 3-minute shorts in 2015 by the animation studio Artland. But then, of course, we've got Kobayashi-san no Maid Dragon, or Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, was adapted into a full-length TV anime by Kyoto Animation in 2017. So, yeah, there was just this, interesting period where Cool Kyoshinja, who has a lot more series than just this, they've published a lot of different stuff, but, all in a row, they've made these different manga. They're getting picked up as these different online shorts. Several of those, ended up, bits from them kind of going viral, and then you get Kobayashi's Dragon Maid.
I should say I just checked, and all of those are on Crunchyroll if people are interested, because I definitely, knowing these are just shorts, I would love to watch these, because you can feel it in Kobayashi-san. You could imagine also being adapted as a series of shorts. KyoAni kind of has their thing that they've done with Lucky Star and Nichijou before, where they do something similar with this to make it a 20-minute weekly anime, but I'm interested in those as well.
Yeah, I think I only saw the first season for whatever reason. I just never got around to watching the second one. But I remember really enjoying the first season of I Can't Understand What My Husband Is Saying. Just like a standard rom-com gags, but they were I remember it being quite funny. Of Cool Kyoshinja's manga series in the mid-2010s, Kobayashi was by far and clearly the most popular. The manga has currently sold 3.8 million copies of the series, which is the most updated numbers I found. And so it was announced on April 2016 that KyoAni would be making that adaptation, which would air for 13 episodes from January to April 2017, with an OVA released on the last Blu-ray volume, as had become KyoAni's custom by this point. Takemoto Yasuhiro directed the series following his work on Amagi Brilliant Park, which is one of the shows that we did not cover. That was an adaptation of a Shoji Gato light novel series. He commented that he felt that kindness/compassion was the core concept of the series and strove to have all the elements of the series contribute to a sense of calm and relaxation. I tried to find interviews and stuff for Takemoto on season 1 of Maid Dragon, and I couldn't find a whole lot, which is unfortunate. He definitely never was very public with stuff, so it's he never did huge amounts of interviews, and obviously at the time he would have no idea that this would end up being his last series. So when you look back on it, it feels like such a shame. You can't find, unless I'm sure there are some paper magazines that have interviews, but I couldn't find anything recorded online from those, which was a shame.
Yeah, I was gonna say if they exist, they would be in magazines or fan books, which unless someone has scanned those and put them online, we're not going to be able to see them because they're way out of print. Yes.
The season generally adapts the first 4 volumes of the manga while making some changes. It's overall a relatively faithful adaptation. This is not the same thing as what they do with their light novel adaptations. We're looking more similar to K-On!, Nichijou, Lucky Star, where yes, there are plenty of original elements and they're sort of stringing together bigger episodes and stories and things like that. But at its core, it is adapting the manga. One of the things that I think is interesting, though, is that the art style of the manga early on for the volumes that they're adapting is quite different. Did you look at any of the manga, Jonathan?
No, I kind of meant to. I looked at a different ancillary thing from Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid that we'll talk about later. I did not get a chance to look at the manga.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to look at the early volumes because the art style is a lot. All the characters are very kind of lanky and very exaggerated in their proportions. Kana in particular looks very, very different. And then over the years, the manga's art style has kind of shifted to look a lot more like the anime. So if you look at any of the more recent volumes of the manga, the art looks pretty similar to the KyoAni series, but the volumes 1 through 4, the art's quite different. And so it's actually pretty interesting going back and looking at it. Other things I noticed just perusing through the manga, I didn't read it in depth, but it definitely felt like KyoAni sort of toned down a little bit of some of the sexual elements. Obviously, they're still there, but that's more prominent in the manga, generally speaking. But overall, it just did not seem super different based on how I kind of perused through it, other than them finding, I think, a much more appealing moe kind of art style to really center the series on, that obviously the mangaka then later saw and was like, you know what, some of those character design changes are good ideas, and kind of reintegrated that back into the manga.
Yeah, I'm looking at sample pages of it now, and it actually looks more Western in the original manga. It looks more like an American comic strip, like that you would see in the newspaper, where there's just a little bit more squashing and stretching of proportions going on. And obviously the show is a bit more refined than that. Not refined in like it's better or worse or anything, but because this looks like a very fun, like, you know, take on it on the page. But for an anime, you would need it to be a little more standardized, which they make work very well.
Yeah. One thing I thought was interesting, I've been looking this up, is that season 1 of Kobayashi's Maid Dragon, or Dragon Maid, there, I did my notes there. I flipped into my notes there, excellent. This series was not actually that successful in terms of Blu-ray sales, which I was surprised by, because the series is very popular. Now, obviously, Blu-ray sales are not the end-all, be-all of popularity, because we are well in 2017 at the streaming point of the show, but it only sold about 3,000 copies per volume, which isn't like horrible, but it's certainly not like a great sort of like track record for the show. But the series did become something of a cult hit, both in Japan, but particularly in America. The show was very popular when it was airing, which is when I originally watched it. And it also has a really big fan base in China, which I think is interesting. But it still has a big, like, it's easy to kind of find stuff in that fan community still. So didn't sort of sell well in your kind of traditional metrics, but obviously it has done incredibly well, to the point where there's a game, there's a second season, there's whole kinds of stuff with this series, and the manga is, of course, still ongoing.
It kind of makes sense to me that this wouldn't be a big physical media seller, because it, like, I'll be honest, I was watching it on Crunchyroll. I watched a lot of it on my phone, hanging out around the house in various places, and I would sometimes kind of break up episodes. And it is like, it's something you could send clips of. It's a little more, you know, it's in the spirit of something like Lucky Star, Nichijou, but where those were in an era of more intense physical media sales from fandoms, I can see why this would not sell that way, and people would be like, it's a great show for streaming because of those qualities.
Yeah, but it is very funny when I was looking up the numbers and stuff. It's always funny just like kind of looking back on things in hindsight of how much overemphasis people like Otaku put on how many Blu-ray copies did it sell, because you can find all these Japanese forum threads from 2017 when the numbers came out being like, oh god, this is a disaster. Well, they're certainly not going to get a Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid season 2. And we're looking at it back as like, no, we did, you know, it's like it did more than well enough. There are a lot of metrics on how these things are successful that aren't just Blu-ray. But of course, Blu-ray sales are like one of the only concrete numbers I can get access to. So it's how many people watched streaming, how much merchandise did it sell? That's a very vague concept that's hard to get hard numbers for on the outside. In February 2019, it was announced on the 8th manga volume that the series would be getting its second season. However, before any further news on that project was announced, disaster struck at KyoAni on July 18th, 2019, when the arson attack occurred, and that is, of course, when, tragically, Takemoto Yasuhiro, the series director, lost his life. So it was, like, in production. We know it was in pre-production. It had already been announced, and some amount of work had been done on it at the point when the arson attack occurred. In the wake of the tragedy, it was initially unclear what would happen to many of KyoAni's announced projects, and on August 11th, 2020, it was then officially announced, finally, that the second season would continue, and that is the point at which they announced the title of it being Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid S, with them saying the S stands for Super, Supreme, Second Life, and Start. So if you're curious what the S is, it's all four of those things. It was then later announced on February 23rd, 2021, that Ishihara Tatsuya had taken over as director, thus putting Sound Euphonium 3 on hold, which was what presumably he would have been working on. We talked about that a little bit in the Sound Euphonium 3 episode. That same announcement revealed that Takemoto Yasuhiro would continue to be credited on the series posthumously as series director. So he has a series director title, and then underneath that, Ishihara has the regular director title. On the official website for the series, on the KyoAni website, Ishihara released a big statement that I went ahead and translated. So this was all originally Japanese, and I translated for us. This is him just kind of talking about the act of taking over as director for this series. So he said, "I'm Ishihara Tatsuya, who shall be serving as the director for Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid S. Normally, taking over as director on a series built up by another director is a difficult thing, but I felt that no one else could take over the series but myself. With that thought in mind, I became involved with this project as director. This series, at first glance, may seem to be popular simply because it's a comedy with a lot of cute characters, but I believe that the way it cuts into deeper parts about humanity and society is also part of its appeal. When there's a scene, Todo comedically replies to Kobayashi that it's almost like you're saying humans aren't part of nature. I believe that those moments where the series can coolly and playfully poke fun at humanity's impudence/arrogance is part of the series' charms and something that permeates the entire story. Even if the director changes, I believe that that won't change at all. I had talked to Takemoto-san about this before, but there's really no need for humans and dragons to be able to coexist harmoniously in the story. Without sharing things, it's a parallel relationship all the way through. Different species can't come to a mutual understanding, they can't live in the same time span, but they can be together regardless, and depicting those individual moments in time is the foundation of this series. Maintaining that foundation with great care, and above all, making a fun, bright home comedy is my goal in joining the production of S. I may be repeating myself, but being able to send out a work like this makes me truly happy. To both old fans and new, I believe this is a series that anyone can enjoy. With a new dragon Ilulu in the mix, it's an even cheerier, sillier Maid dragon, so I hope you watch and enjoy."
It's a lovely statement, and you can see a lot of, I think, his specific take on the show that is maybe not different. I think it's complementary to Takemoto's, but I think he emphasizes different things in his season. But I also, that part where he says, "I don't think anyone else could have taken it over." I think reading between the lines, it also is, he's the other most senior director at KyoAni.
Yes.
This is like, if anyone left after the arson attack was going to rally the troops, it was obviously going to be Ishihara Tatsuya. But also, of course, he has done shows like this before, and he's done shows like this with Takemoto Yasuhiro. And you can tell that it wasn't just him taking it over out of obligation, but believing that the show had something to say and had a purpose in the world. And I think it's lovely to hear him express that at the outset.
Yeah, and I just think there's this sense of wanting that legacy to live on, to have this person who, they were obviously friends in real life and coworkers for over 2 decades at that point, to see that project through across the finish line. And yeah, I think it's just it's a really interesting statement, because it's a very it's a big statement as well. This was released very early in the production as just kind of an announcement of this is what we're doing, this is our vision. And I think it's pretty interesting.
Well, and just to say how, seriously Ishihara took this, I think it's easy to forget because we did these slightly out of order. He put Sound Euphonium 3 on the back burner for this.
Yes.
So it was kind of a, hey, I can do that whenever, but this was the thing that Takemoto was working on. Let's do that now, I think says a lot.
Yeah, if Ishihara had not taken over, season 2 would never have happened. It would have just languished, and whatever work that had been done on the first few episodes would just have never seen the light of day. So anyways, to continue on, while it is not clear exactly how much work was completed on S before the attack, and of the work that had been done, how much had survived the fire itself, because the fire did destroy a lot of production materials at KyoAni, Takemoto Yasuhiro is specifically co-credited alongside Ishihara for the storyboards on episodes 1 and 2, so clearly enough work for those early episodes was done in terms of storyboarding that they left that credit in there. And then also Fujita Haruka, who at that point was no longer at KyoAni because she left in late 2019, she is co-credited for storyboards on episode 3. So clearly some of that kind of work on the early episodes had survived enough for those people to be co-credited on storyboards.
Well, and this is also why they leave Takemoto's director credit there. I don't think that is just a tribute to him. I think it is partially, obviously. But, if the show if they were that far along to the point that they were storyboarding anything, then he made significant directorial decisions that Ishihara was honoring, which is part of the whole point of it. And so, his influence is still there on that season.
Yeah. So the second season aired 12 episodes from July to September 2021, making it the first KyoAni TV production released after the attack. And then additionally, you have your OVA that was released alongside the last volume. The second season performed similarly to the first, about 3,000-ish copies per Blu-ray volume, but similarly was also popular in several global markets. It was big on Crunchyroll. It still had its big release in China. In fact, like, while I think we are both on the same page that we prefer season 1, in general, season 2 is actually rated higher. If you go to like fan rating sites, like, people really love season 2. And I think that it kind of makes sense to me because it feels a little bit more kind of populist in not a bad way, right? It's like a little bit more broadly comedic. It's got more action kind of stuff in there. It's more on the Nichijou side of things than
it's crowd pleasing in a way that I think, like, crowd pleasing doesn't have to be a bad word, and I don't think either of us are using it here, but it gives the people what they want in a couple of different ways.
Yes.
Take that as you will.
Exactly. And then the series did, this is just like a fun footnote that we could talk a little bit about here. The series did also get a game release, which is kind of weird, but this is at a period that I feel like I haven't seen one of these in a little bit, but there was like 2020 to 2022-ish. There was just a spree of some different game adaptations for various different anime properties you normally wouldn't think would get a game in this day and age. But there is a bullet hell shoot 'em up video game on PS4 and Switch that was released in 2022 called Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid Burst Forth Chotogan Breath. And Jonathan, you have something you want to say?
I got the game used. I got it used from, I think, Amazon, but when it came, this is the funniest part of this to me, Sean. This is an ex-library copy from the Cuyahoga County Public Library. I didn't know where that was. I had to look it up. It's from Ohio. And I cannot say how much I love the idea that there was a library in Ohio where you could go check out, loan, borrow, take it home, bring it back, share it with other people. Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid Burst Forth Chotogan Breath. I want to meet the librarian that bought this and put it on the shelf. Clearly it didn't do that well because it was eventually on Amazon for me to buy for $10. But that brought a really big smile to my face. If you're talking about how much anime has changed since you and I were kids, this game being in an Ohio public library, I feel like is a synecdoche for all of that.
Absolutely. I do love that in the subtitle, they also just leave it as Chotogan. They didn't bother to try to, like, the anime subtitles translate that as Simple Gon, because it's a portmanteau of Choroi, which means like sort of easy to kind of convince, like sort of, very kind of naive almost, and then dragon, of course. And so that's whatever Kobayashi calls Toru whenever she tricks her into doing something is Chotogan. And for the video game subtitle, they're like, fuck it, the nerds who buy this game are not going to need that translated.
Yep. Just
leave it. This seems to be the logic, and fair enough. I think that goes through. Did you play any of the game, Jonathan?
Yes, I've played a little bit of it. So here's the thing. It is a bullet hell shooter, and it is fucking hard. I have not beat a single one of the stages. There's 3, at least at the beginning. I don't know if you unlock more later, but there are 3 stages, and it is arcade style. And I did finally beat one of the stages when I bumped the difficulty down to easy. There's like 5 difficulties: very easy, normal, hard, very hard. And I bumped it down to easy, got through one of the stages, but I got through with only one of you have 3 dragons. It is Toru, Kana, and
Elma.
Elma are the 3 that you start with, and I got through with like one of them left, and then I went to the next stage and I found that doesn't restore any of your health between stages. You gotta beat all 3 without fucking up. And I have not played a lot of bullet hell shooters. Honestly, the most bullet hell I've ever played is the parts in Nier Automata that are bullet hell shooters. And this is like an actual installment in that genre. But it is funny. There is a part in my dissertation where I talk about anime video games, and I talk about the kind of weird line that video games like this have to draw, where video game genres are different than anime genres. So depending on the video game genre, you might love the anime property, but you might have no ability to even like play the game. And I mentioned like Dragon Ball FighterZ. Anyone who loves fighting games will probably enjoy that, but I can't guarantee that if you're a Dragon Ball fan, you'll be able to play it because it is a fighting game, right?
Yeah.
This is, I feel like, the most literal example of that I've ever seen, because it's a real bullet hell shooter. I'm not good at them. I've not beat any of it. The story material around it is very cheap. It's like it's basic stills of the characters with very kind of lax dialogue that they give. It is not a game that you need to go seek out, but I'm glad I tried it.
Yes, I played a bit of the game as well. I noticed it was $40 on the PSN, and I was like, I'm probably not going to pay $40. So I maybe found other methods where there's a version of maybe the other console it released on can also very easily be played through other methods. If you just want to try it out and see, if you just want to sort of see if it's for you and worth the $40. I have a little bit more experience with bullet hells than you, Jonathan, but not much. So I think I was able to do a bit better at the game. But yes, it is a bullet hell game. If you are into those and you're also into Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, I don't know how big that fucking overlap is on the Venn diagrams, but whoever is in that middle piece, you probably should get this game because it does feel like a pretty legit bullet hell. I like the mechanic that you've got your 3 characters. And if you can switch between them at any time, that all 3 of them have different sort of shooting styles. Like Kana has like a bunch of homing shots and stuff like that, but is lower damage. But anyone who you're not actively playing as heals a little bit. So I think that's how the logic of how you're supposed to be able to get through multiple stages in a row is to use that mechanic intelligently. And so it seems to feel like it is probably a pretty well-made bullet hell game. I'm not deep enough to that genre to be able to criticize it.
No, I thought it was good. I just thought it was hard.
Yes.
I have no problems with it. Again, the kind of wraparound material is very cheap, but the actual bullet hell thing is fine.
Yes. I think $40 is wildly overpriced for it on PSN. If it was like $15, I think it would be a much easier. You might, if you think you might like it and you like the series, it would maybe be worth checking out at a price like that. $40 is a lot to ask for. But the game exists. I'm glad it exists. I love that there are weird games, in this world where we don't have, proper, old school style handheld consoles like the Vita or the PSP or the DS, right? The Switch obviously is handheld, but it's also a home console. We don't get this as much, the weird anime game, like Lucky Star, if that came out today, would not have a video game. And there's 2 or 3 Lucky Star video games. And I'm glad that someone's trying to keep that spirit alive with Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid burst forth Chorgon Breath, the easiest title to remember in the world.
It is, and I got my library copy for I think $10 plus shipping. I'm happy with that. And who knows? I've been revising my dissertation chapters the last couple weeks, and the next one I have to do is the one that's on video games. Maybe I sneak a reference to this in there, and then I can do this as a tax write-off. I don't know. It'll be funny. I will get to write the words Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid burst forth Chorogon Breath in my PhD dissertation, and that'll make me laugh.
Yeah, you can put this in a footnote, and then you have to make a footnote for the footnote where you explain what Chorgon means. You can just quote me from the podcast if you want.
I've done that before. I quoted you on, I mentioned in one chapter, I don't even remember the context, VTubers, and I went, I don't know how to describe VTubers, and I went to the episode where we did the VTuber thing on the Weekly Stuff podcast, and I transcribed a little bit of what you said, and I went, good. Sean is better describing what the fuck this is, and I just quoted Sean.
All right, so that's the history section. We're getting a little on a bit of a tangent here. So let's go into the crew stuff here. So I'll go through the crew for season 1 and then talk a bit with season 2, where it's obviously mostly similar people in season 2 except for the director. But so season 1, the director, of course, Takemoto Yasuhiro, whom, he had done some other stuff that we didn't cover, like Amagi Brilliant Park. Of course, the shows that we've covered that he did are Lucky Star and then Hyoka, right? I think those are the only ones that we did. Because then he also did all the Full Metal Panic stuff, but we didn't cover those because you have to start with a non-Q&A show for those. So
he was also the series Enshutsu on Haruhi Season 2, and seems to have had a pretty big presence as the Enshutsu there. So,
Yeah. Haruhi definitely feels to me like it is a kind of a tag team between him and Ishihara Tatsuya when you look at the series as a whole, including the movie. For sure, his influence is very big on that series. In terms of the writer for the series, is Yamada Yuka is the main writer, who they've done a lot of different sort of writing there, but they're a different writer for Kyoani. But unlike most Kyoani shows, but like most Takemoto shows, Takemoto typically does this. There are other writers on the series. And one of the reasons why Takemoto usually does this is that he writes episodes himself. And I think that's true of every episode he's the main director on. He wrote episodes 3, 7, and 9. Nishikata Masashi wrote episodes 4, 10, 12, and the OVA. And then our old friend Fumihiko Shimo did episodes 5 and 8. So a big spread of different writers, especially when you think this is a 13-episode show plus one OVA. But Yamada Yuka, the overall writer responsible for the overall series. But this is pretty typical of Takemoto's shows. Like Amagi Brilliant Park is very similar, where there's a bunch of different writers covering that just one core show. The character designer for this one is Kadawaki Miku. Kadawaki did character designs for Beyond the Boundary, where she was also the chief animation director, but she was also this on Amagi Brilliant Park, so this is kind of carrying over some of the people from the Amagi Brilliant Park series. She also then does it on Tsudene, the archery series. The chief animation director is Maruki Nobuaki. Maruki began at KyoAni in the late 2000s as an animator and quickly rose to an animation director. He became chief animation director for the first time on Amagi Brilliant Park. And so again, that kind of brought that over. And this is one of the only instances where you have character design and chief animation director are split roles. So Kadawaki is character design, Maruki is chief animation director. That is how it worked on Amagi Brilliant Park. That is how it works here. And then that is also how it works on Tsudene. So this kind of character design animation director team, that has kind of carried through from Amagi all the way through to the Tsudene series, which just did season 2 recently. The music composer is Ito Masumi, who is the same composer from Beyond the Boundary. This is one of those composers that has 3 or 4 different pseudonyms, and it is a pain in the ass looking up the credits, because there was like a different pseudonym used for this show, but then I was researching them, I was like, well, isn't that the person who did the Beyond the Boundary music? And it's like, yes, it is. So Ito Masumi is the overall music composer. You do have 2 other composers who also contribute music, but they're a bigger influence in season 2, so Kondo Kenji and Koto Ringo also do work a little bit on the music for season 1, but they have a bigger split of the music overall on season 2. And then in terms of episode directors, we've got mostly a lot of like people that we know, because this is again 2017, so this is made in concurrence with a lot of our Splendid Isolation shows we did from that period. So it's a lot of the directors that were big in that chunk. So Fujita Haruka was the episode director for episodes 1 and 10, Sawa Shinpei episodes 2, 9, and 13, Kitanohara Noriyuki episodes 3 and 7, Yamamura Takia episodes 4 and 11, Ogawa Taichi episodes 5 and 12, Kigami Yoshiji episodes 6 and 13, and then Yamada Naoko episode 8. And Takemoto did not direct any episodes directly, but he did a bunch of storyboards. So he did storyboards for episodes 1, 2, and 13. And Ishidate Taichi is co-credited with Ogawa for storyboards on episode 5. Ishidate Tatsuya did the storyboards on episode 10. But overall, this is like, it's been a while since we did a Q&A show that was this tight on episode directors, where it's like, most people did 2 episodes. You got a couple people sharing storyboard credits, but clearly was a pretty tight ship run on this show, just based on how regular those episode director credit numbers roll up from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then roll over to their next set of episodes. When we're looking at Series 2, Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid S, again, series director overall, Takemoto Yasuhiro, who gets that credit posthumously. As we mentioned, he had done plenty of work on the series, including some of the storyboards for episodes 1 and 2, so some of that work is carrying over. The sort of regular director role is now given to Ishihara Tatsuya. The writing is still Yamada Yuka, with Fumihiko Shimo coming back to do 3 episodes, 5, 7, 11, and Masashi Nishikawa coming back to doing several episodes, 3, 4, 7, 8, and 10. The same character designer and chief animation director split with Kadawaki Miku and Maruki Nobuaki. The musical team is the same, although again we have these 2 other contributors, Kondo Kenji and Koto Ringo, who did a couple of tracks in season 1. It's a pretty even split where each one of the composers, Ito Masumi, Kondo Kenji, and Koto Ringo, each of them do about a third of the soundtrack. So it's a more kind of widespread between those people.
And I gotta say, I like the soundtrack for both seasons. I think it's great throughout. I like the season 2 soundtrack more.
Interesting.
Oh, because it's just got more variety. It's like it gets into more of the like jazzy pieces. I kind of like how it reflects different parts of the show. It just felt like there was a bigger like reach to it, and this explains why to me.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually pretty significantly prefer the soundtrack in season 1. Okay. Although I see why you like season 2, because you're right, it has more variety. I like season 1's focus on a handful of like really major motifs and themes that it evolves throughout the series that I think helps give the show its tone, but it definitely feels like Ishihara and Takemoto took a pretty different approach in how they used the music. Because of course season 2 has access to all the music from season 1 and reuses it in a couple of key places. But it feels like they had kind of slightly different visions for how the music worked that reflect their different approaches for the show.
Yeah, I think if you put the season 2 soundtrack on season 1, it would be wrong. I do think, like, for Ishihara's take, I don't think the season 1 soundtrack would have worked, because that soundtrack is for a more sort of placid version of the show that Ishihara did not direct.
Yeah. In terms of episode directors for season 2, Ishihara Tatsuya did episodes 1 and 12. Ogai Taichi did episodes 2 and 10. Kitanohara Noriyuki did episodes 3, 5, and 11. Sao Shinpei did episodes 4 and 8. Yamamura Takia did episode 6. And Ota Minoru did episodes 7 and 9. Episode 7 is the first episode that Ota directed, though he didn't do the storyboards on that one. And then he did the storyboards on 9, a pattern that we have seen going all the way back to, like, Clannad, of this kind of bringing someone up into this role, having them direct an episode earlier in the season, having them do the direction and the storyboards for a later episode in the season. And, of course, he is now a pretty notable figure at KyoAni because he has done multiple episodes for Tsurune Season 2, and then he had a pretty notable role on Sound Euphonium 3, which we talked about in that episode, taking over as the musical instrument director and doing an episode on that show as well. So this is kind of where he came up into a more prominent role, was through this show. And then Takemoto Yasuhiro, as mentioned before, co-credited for episodes 1 and 2 in terms of storyboards, and Fujita Haruka co-credited for storyboards on episode 3. So that's kind of the split of the production staff between these two shows.
Yes. And then in terms of the musical themes, we want to talk about these really quick because they're fun. I particularly like the openings for both seasons. Season 1 is Aozora Rhapsody, or I guess it would be Blue Rhapsody, basically.
Blue Sky Rhapsody.
Blue Sky Rhapsody, yeah. By, how do you say the name of the artist? Fauna?
Fauna, I think. I've not heard it be pronounced. It is in Irish, is where the name comes from.
I feel Irish is the hardest one to pronounce.
Yes.
Like names generally. So to any Irish listeners, I apologize. And then season 2 is I Know Supreme. I love both of these. They're very creative. Season 2 does the thing of having basically rap vocals that it puts in the mouth of the different characters, which is super fun. But season 1, I think I just like that song a little bit more. And I also love the build it has at the end, where it just gets a little crazy with like Elma's face on the candy roll that is getting cut. And then you have Fafnir's face like flowering out of all these shoots of like flowers, which very much reminds me of weird things from the end of the Lucky Star OVA that Takemoto did, with all the characters becoming insects and whatnot. You could tell who directed that one, but I love both of these openings. I think they're both a blast.
Yeah, they're both like kind of classic Moe show openings to me. Yeah, like I love them both. Aozora Rhapsody has just that very classic quality to it. You know, you've got that little like choo choo call out at the beginning that really gets you pumped up. I love the piece of animation in the first opening where you've got it's during the chorus where you have all the side characters floating up into the sky and that their arms T-posed and they're like spinning, and the body mechanics of it are so nice where they're kind of their body starts to twist but their head stays in place, and then when it hits a certain point their head flips around and spins all the way around and their body catches up, and just like the body mechanics of it are so precise that it's such a nice piece of animation I really love. But then also I Know Supreme is incredibly fun. I like you have Ishihara kind of reuses some of the visual ideas of his Nichijou openings, where you have the like circular objects with all the characters holding something up and the camera zooms into them through to where another character is, and it does that over and over again. Is very fun. You've got all the raps, which are a good time. I really like there's this little kind of subdued dance that Ilalu's friend does, the boy character, the Shimanohiro character does this little dance that I really like. It's both the openings, really good, really high energy. And it is just also the band is not a band you hear a lot. It's not kind of like one of your standard Annie song bands. And so it just has a really unique sound to it. In terms of our endings, we've got both endings are by the Chotagons, or technically the Super Chotagons for season 2, which is your standard like Moe anime thing of where we get all of our female actors together and they kind of form a little unit to sing the song. Season 1's ending is interspecies communication, and seasons 2, 1 is Maid with Dragons. They're both good. They're both like sort of a little bit more standard for this kind of show, though I do like the lyrics in interspecies communication. I think are very fun.
Yes, I agree with that.
It sort of captures a little bit of the energy of the show in a very particular way. But yeah, they're fun. But I think the openings definitely steal the show in terms of the music for this show.
Yeah, but it's, it is, I think both of them, the openings and the endings, remind you that, oh yeah, KyoAni kind of invented this thing, the style of Moe show openings back with Haruhi, which obviously Takemoto heavily involved with, and then Ishihara, and it's just, they're still very good at it, even if, like, Maid with Dragons, Season 2, not my favorite one, but still, like, a definitely above average version of this, so.
Yes.
Japanimation Station.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can support the show directly on Ko-fi at the link in the description, and remember to check out the Weekly Stuff podcast, our long-running series on movies and video games and everything else on all platforms.
And now, back to the show.
All right, and I guess that's all the background material, right?
Yeah. So now, how do we want to tackle these shows, Jonathan? Because we do have 2 seasons, and I do think it feels right to me to do both these seasons in one episode. But we do have a big slice of anime in front of us. So how do you want to chop this up?
Well, I think we should put them in. Contention is the wrong word. They're not fighting, but in comparison, and put them next to each other. Because, we're not going to have time here to go through every single episode, and it's not the kind of show that you would need to do that with anyway. I think, let me just say, my piece on it, and then I'll see if you agree. Again, I want to be clear, I like this whole show all the way through. Good show. I really love the first season, and I think it's because this show is like an exceptionally delicate tonal balancing act they're trying to do, and it's the kind of thing Takemoto was so uniquely well suited for. If you look at, and you mentioned these earlier, I think particularly Lucky Star or Hyoka, or Season 2 of Haruhi, which, remember, has both the Endless Eight, but also the Sai of Suzumiya Haruhi, the one where they're making the movie, which is probably tonally the hardest stretch of all of Haruhi. In terms
you
of
also have Bamboo Rhapsody, which is a Takemoto Yasuhiro directed episode as well, which I think exists in this tonal space also.
And I think it's true of his individual episodes of other people's shows, like Chunibyo Season 1, where they bring him in to do, Takemoto, you're doing the episode where we have to sell this as a sweeping romance after several episodes of high comedy. And he's so good at threading tricky and even, I would say, paradoxical tonal needles, which is so much of what Lucky Star and Hyoka are. And I think this is one of those. It is both an irreverent slice of life show with a skit episode sort of based format, and it is a very sweet show with real character growth and continuity in between episodes. And I think for me, if you tip too far in one direction or the other, my eyes glaze over just a little bit. Season 1 is very delicate in everything it does. The humor is never particularly intense or zany, but I also think the sweetness is never laid on too thick. And I think it does something very smart in giving itself a continuity spine by tracing a calendar year and using dates as landmarks, like big, festivals or holidays to keep sort of the engine going. Season 2 is a bit more overt at everything it does. The humor is more zany. It often goes off in a more Nichijou-esque vein. The action, when it comes, is bigger and more intense. And when it wants to be sweet, it ladles it on quite a bit thicker. It'll often, you can tell, this is a sweet segment. There's no jokes here. This is more serious. And it doesn't quite have that same calm underbelly or that spine of sort of tracing real time that I also think means it's a season with a little bit less of a shape. And so I think that's kind of the big difference in how I would describe the approaches. And I can totally understand how someone might enjoy Season 2, because that overtness often leads to very memorable imagery and moments. And if you're vibing with it, great. I vibed more with, I think, the delicacy of Season 1. And I also have some issues with, I think, the lore when it comes in Season 2 or even the Season 1 finale, I don't care about at all, and I think that's a huge mistake. But other than that, I think that's my overall split between the seasons.
Yeah, I think I fundamentally agree with that. That for me, it is, Season 1 is a show that is about tone and mood. That is what the whole show is, fundamentally, and I think it feels like such a refinement of a particular kind of fascination that I think Takemoto Yasuhiro had as a director for us of what we've covered going back to Lucky Star and Hyoka. in particular with Lucky Star, because you can see it come into Lucky Star as Takemoto takes over that show. Because remember, he was not director initially. You had Yamamoto Yutaka, the asshole, was originally the director, and then Takemoto had to take over when that dude shit his whole career down the toilet. And so you see that shift happen in Lucky Star, and when you get to the middle point of that show, it starts to occur. And then it's all over Hyoka, which Hyoka is not a comedy show like Lucky Star or Kobayashi are, and it's not really a moe show, but it is also still a show that is about these sort of like lazy moments in life. Like, it's about these kind of the in-between moments is kind of what I feel like he likes to focus in on. And this word can be overused sometimes in the critical sphere, but I think it's very appropriate here. The liminal moments is what I think of this, like, sort of where these sort of different spaces meet and create this kind of uncanny effect. And to like really zoom in on it for Lucky Star, I think where you see it most potently in Lucky Star is in the very odd but very memorable sequence in that one episode near the beginning where Konata goes to the Haruhi concert that Hirono Aya, the voice actress who plays Haruhi, but also the voice actress that plays Konata, is up there singing. Konata sees her, is sort of starstruck by it, and then on the walk home doesn't know how to process the emotions of that moment. And that is this sort of really weird, strange, bizarre space. There it's inflected with all this meta stuff as well. But it's also just that sense of like, so late at night that it's almost the morning and you're kind of in this weird daze, and it's that walk back home. And the walk back home is what feels like is important there, not the concert that you were just at. And I think it's that feeling. Then Hyoka, you have it all over the place. In Hyoka, it's expressed in things like Oreki being all the time spent in Oreki at the culture festival, where he's just at the table, in the room, in the corner, at the top of the building, off to the side, and the way that the atmosphere of that space is communicated has that feeling. Or like the episode where it's Oreki and Shitanda are in the room together trying to solve the mystery that just comes over the intercom. Obviously, Takemoto didn't necessarily direct all of those specific episodes or storyboard them, but the tone as a director that he imposed on those series becomes so palpable. Or the episode in Hyoka with the helicopter stuff and them going to the library to investigate it, where it's these like weird moments of like regular daily life that intersect with something that feels almost dreamlike and kind of magical. And that's also, for me, for a series we didn't cover here, but going back to kind of like something I watched to prep this series, is the OVA series Nurse Witch Komugi-chan, which is a weird show. It's only 3 OVA episodes, but it's the first thing that KyoAni did basically its own production coming out of that very weird show, The Soul Taker. We talked all about this in the very first KyoAni episode where I talked about these kinds of things, of the build-up to KyoAni making its whole own series. But Takemoto directed that OVA series, and it's got some of those qualities. It's also got a Kamike episode that feels like that's also a weird sort of fixed point for Takemoto's career. He always comes back to Kamike episodes somehow, but the way he does them is so particular and so unique and feels so lived in. And I do think there's just this kind of tonal space of the uncanny, the daily life, and the weird in-between moments of daily life that intersect with something that feels almost larger than life. And this weird kind of belittling of oneself in the face of that, of the enormity of what regular life is, that's so potent and so intense. And season 1 of Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid is that distilled down into a single show. I think it's like the most refined expression of this very strange, kind of really hard to grasp, very elusive tone, or delicate tone, I think is the word used, Jonathan, that I like, that I just think is so powerful. And you just kind of get submerged deep into it in these little moments that he finds, and every single episode has 2 or 3 of them, and they're very rich and intense and tonally thick. They kind of just wash over you. And I love that so much about season 1. And season 2 doesn't like lose that in its entirety. It's still there, and there are moments of episodes that get there. And like my 2 favorite episodes of season 2, which are episode 10, which is the Kana one where she goes to America, in particular the second half of that episode where you get that tone stuff. And then the last episode, episode 12, I think is the most that gets expressed, where you have the summer festival and then you have the like Sakura Blossom viewing party at the end of that episode, where both of those are about these sort of weird, surreal spaces in regular life that I think Ishihara hits on some of those tonal things. Not expressed in the same way as Takemoto would have done them, but it feels like the show is expressing a similar kind of space through a different way. But overall, season 2 veers more into this kind of more overt madcap comedy territory. It focuses a lot more heavily on the side characters, which I think is still fun and good. You've got a lot more of a sense of, this is an episode that's a Shota episode. This is an episode that's a Kana episode. This is an episode that's an Elma episode that really focuses in on those. And that works, but it does mean that you, I think, leave behind some of that energy of the Kobayashi-Toru relationship that's the core of season 1 that everything else revolves around. And that sort of the weird sort of nature of that relationship that Kobayashi and Toru has doesn't become the anchor point anymore. And so you're given more over to the kind of big running gags that each character is kind of in charge of, and you kind of head deeper into those things rather than those things feeling like the garnish on season 1, but not really the kind of the entree.
Yes. And I think the other thing here that just doesn't work for me when it gets into it is the, like, lore of the dragon world and the other world and all that. Like, the only episode in season 1 that doesn't really work for me is the finale. I think it's, like, a well-done episode, but the whole thing with the Emperor of Demise coming and Kobayashi having to figure out, like, the Kobayashi side of it I like more, but, like, getting into, like, some of the big dragon comes in and steals Toru away. Once it gets, like, that big, I find myself disconnecting. And season 2 has several episodes that get, like, way into this. I think the one that really does not work for me is episode 11 of season 2, which is all about, like, Toru's backstory, and the Emperor of Demise is working with the head of Kobayashi's company, and, like, that's a level where, like, all of those liminal things you're talking about, Sean, just kind of go out the window once you have it kind of become that big. I actually think that episode 11 is an interesting one to study because it's a Kitanohara Noriyuki episode, and it is extremely Kitanohara Noriyuki in its direction, but I think it feels like a lot of effort to try to, like, make feel kind of palpable something that just feels like a bit of an exposition dump in a show that does not need exposition dumps. And that's kind of another, and some of this is probably just where the manga goes. I know they're not just making this up whole cloth, but that's something that does not work for me as the show goes along.
Yeah, I think I generally agree. Like, I don't really have a problem with it in the finale for season 1, mostly because it is anchored around Kobayashi's experience of it. Because it's obviously, It's done for your sort of, like, standard finale for this sort of show, but it's a standard because it's kind of what it needs to be, and it works, of having the fantasy thing that was introduced in episode 1 being taken away from your main character, then being faced with life without Toru, and then how do you kind of reclaim that? And for there, it's just the Shuentei, or the Emperor of Demise, invading our world. Yeah, I definitely think that when you get too into the weeds about, let's have a long sequence or most of an episode that just takes place in the past in the other world. You have the episode that's that has stuff I like about it, but it's all Toru and Elma and their whole backstory. And it's like, it's nice to get that backstory, but at the same time, it pulls the focus of the show so far away from the intersection of the elements, which is what this series is about to me. That's like what creates that tone, is you have these weird things that intersect. You've got a dragon who's a, like, otaku maid living with a regular woman who's like an office lady working a, like, you know, dead-end fucking job at an office where she comes home at 8 o'clock at night every day. You know, it's like such a weird confluence of different things, of, like, the dregs of daily life intersecting with this totally fantasy character that's here contained in an otaku package. Like, there's just something that's so evocative about all those elements slammed together that when it's just, here's our dragon people in the other world trying to figure out what makes humans tick in this fantasy world with them worshipping Elma, it's not a bad story, but it's not nearly as interesting as some of the other material. And I think I'm with you there that S just kind of gets too into the weeds on that stuff in different places. And when you go too far with that stuff, it just kind of pulls the focus out from what makes Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid feel like a really unique show, and it makes the show feel more generic than it otherwise did.
That's exactly it. Like, when that 11th episode, the Kitanohara one, that the 11th episode of season 2, it's most of that episode. The very beginning is the skit about Kobayashi having like a hurt back and her buying herself all these different like items. And that's a funny little 5-minute slice of life skit. And then the rest of it is lore. And I just found myself thinking, this is the penultimate episode. I want to spend more time like with the characters goofing off or just having fun or enjoying each other's company. And this feels more generic. This feels more like a different show. And I think the other question I would always find myself asking when it leaned into the lore stuff is, because I was, they never do it without a purpose. Like that episode 11, is trying to give you more of a sense of what Toru gets from being with Kobayashi. And the one about her and Elma is trying to give you a sense of those characters' backstory and history. And as you say, that's not necessarily unwelcome. But I always found myself thinking, would there be a way to do this, like get to this character point without bringing the lore in? Are there things you could just do in the daily life stuff that would also get these character beats out? And I think in season 2, my answer was almost always yes. I think the season 1 finale is more defensible because it's what you said about taking the fantasy element away, becomes a good forcing point for Kobayashi realizing how much she wanted it in the first place. I for instance, the end of season 2 is trying to be more about Kobayashi asserting her love of Toru and like trying to be more reciprocal about that. And I definitely found myself thinking throughout episode 11, I think stuff in the present day without all the lore, I think you could do those plot beats better if you weren't getting into this more generic fantasy stuff.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because it feels like that's more or less what season 1 did. And again, I think you're right that some of this just comes down to, I believe, what they're adapting from the manga. There's a certain amount of like, you either have to like change more dramatically certain things to avoid this problem. But like season 1 so very rarely pulls its focus away from the kind of the current point in time and is always kind of looking at Toru's life through that lens. And it leaves more the lore stuff is kind of thrown off weird background references pulling from a strange hodgepodge of real world dragon mythology. And that stuff I adore. Like, I love when they go into that territory, particularly this show goes into the weeds on stuff that I'm always fascinated by, because it's something that has been kind of ejected in modern times, which is Christianity's relationship to dragon mythology. Yes. And the fact that there is, in the Middle Ages, there's like a very rich tradition of all these kinds of dragon-related Christian myths, partially because of the pulling in all the Germanic and Nordic myths that, the Germans and the Norse, they love their goddamn dragons. They're all over the place in those stories. And there's obviously a huge amount of cultural fusion that's happening there with Christianity in those regions all throughout. This is like Old English into like the 13th, 14th century. And so you have all these different kinds of dragon myths, the most famous one being, of course, St. George. But if you go to a modern day church, I think you'd be very confused if the dude on the pulpit started going off about this whole story of a knight going and fighting a dragon and all that kind of stuff. And you're coming around to like, where does Jesus figure into this? And like Satan, and how does that coexist with the dragon? Like, did God make the dragons? Like, what? Like, did Noah have a dragon on his boat? Like, how does the dragon mythology and sort of modern understanding of Christianity intersect? And modern Christianity just kind of ejects that stuff. Which makes sense, but it's disappointing as someone who likes dragons. I think it would have been a more attractive philosophy if they had left the dragon stuff in there. Maybe as a kid, I would have been more willing to kind of like go to a church or something to see what was going on there. I like that this show just kind of pulls in little bits and pieces of that, and you have just this sort of like Old Testament-ass looking version of God in some of the vague flashbacks you get, chucking a giant magic sword at Toru, the dragon. You've got maybe my favorite joke in the entire series, which is in episode 10, the Christmas episode, where Toru says, "Christmas, huh? Well, I hate to celebrate the birth of that guy's son, but it does seem like a nice event," which is the most tossed off way to refer to Jesus I have ever seen in my life, and it's amazing. And
I think I did a literal spit take hearing that, Sean, because I agree, it's the best joke in the series, and it probably is a joke that doesn't land as hard on, like, the Japanese viewer, but if you are an American viewer, conditioned to, like, those jokes are kind of just off limits in our media. The just like Christmas, I hate to celebrate the birth of that guy's son. And the way she says it in Japanese, Aitsuno, it's like so disrespectful.
Yes.
It's so good. It's so funny. And it's like such a like culture clash. I love it.
Yeah. And when the series does that stuff of just sort of grabbing random, like Fafnir and Quetzalcoatl and stuff, like these different dragons are kind of like pulled from various different kinds of cultural myths around dragons. and then including the Christian stuff. Like, all of that creates this nice sort of, like, hodgepodge and melting pot of vague mythology and folklore to kind of pin some of these outlandish dragon jokes on. But when you actually spend time going over, the Chaos faction and the Harmony faction and this, that, and the other thing, yeah, you're right, that it just gets so into the weeds. You're so removed from the more grounded, real-world, daily life stuff that the show really is sort of pinning itself primarily on. And when instead you've got it as, like, weird, sort of outlandish, thrown-off comments by the dragons that are a little bit relatable because, again, they are pulling from actual folklore just in a kind of weird way, and, again, this big kind of melting pot sort of way, that gives it a sort of a fun little tossed-off gag quality about it that I can really get behind. But season 2 just goes too far in this other direction. And yeah, you're right. Episode 11 is probably the one that is the most of that, because that is where you get the most of the Emperor of Demise telling you everything about how the Chaos faction started and the Harmony faction split it off and the Spectator faction was here and I had my kid and I wanted them to be free and all this kind of stuff. And you're like, kind of end up watching a different show at that point.
Yes. So the other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of a difference between the two seasons, and this one is more nebulous, but it's something that I think there's a whole discussion here to have that I think is really interesting, which is that season 1 in particular is very committed to the androgyny of Kobayashi, the character, in a way that I find really interesting and honestly found very refreshing after Sound Euphonium and the amount of Yuri baiting going on there, is that particularly in Takemoto's season, Kobayashi nominally identifies as a woman, but there are basically no jokes about her being a woman, and very few plot points or moments where she is actively thinking about that or identifying it. Obviously, she dresses masculine. The voice, and I'm forgetting the name of the voice actress here, but you have them all listed, Mutsumi Tamura, is doing this very... I honestly had to stop and think, is this Romy Park for a second when the series started? Because it's a very Romy Park-esque voice. Like, it sounds like Edward Elric. It is this, like, sort of masculinized female voice. She obviously dresses masculine. And she has this very kind of open relationship to Toru that I think is interesting, where she is not necessarily inviting or overall accepting Toru's romantic and sexual overtures, but I think it's also notable that she doesn't really shoot them down that hard in season 1 either. There's a lot of scenes that play out where they just kind of feel like a couple, like maybe a couple where one partner is more sexually open and vocal about them being that, but two people who feel very comfortable and intimate around each other in that way. And it invites these very queer readings, especially because of Kobayashi's androgyny. And I think it never shoots those queer readings down in a way that I find can be very, disappointing when that happens. And season 2 shifts that pretty heavily right off the bat. The first 2 episodes are much more straightforwardly about Kobayashi being a woman. She rejects Toru, again, in the sense that everything is a little more overt in season 2. When Toru makes a sexual advance, Kobayashi tends to push back more forcefully, makes it clear that she is not gay. Like, there are more references to her sexuality. Then you also have the whole thing where, and I think this is one of the more distasteful things in the show, frankly, is when Ilulu does the spell to make her a boy for a day, make Kobayashi a boy for a day, which also changes her sexuality, which I think is gross and gender essentialist. And the rest of the season isn't as intense on it, but there definitely, I kept taking notes of moments where, like, this is more overt in how Kobayashi is reacting to Toru being sexual. This is more overt in her thinking of herself as a woman and comparing herself to women and worrying about the size of her breasts and things like that. Whereas I think one of the most, like, compelling things in season 1 is that the character is fairly androgynous and seems completely comfortable in that identity. And then the kind of queer readings with Toru, the kind of Yuri adjacent stuff, is just more kind of part of the fabric of it rather than a tension point. And I think part of this is also just the way Takemoto is more in Kobayashi's POV than I think Ishihara is in season 2. So season 1 is just more in those gray areas, because I think Kobayashi herself is kind of in a gray area. And season 2 is more aligned with all the zany dragons who are a bit more all or nothing. So that's a lot of thoughts, and I'm just curious if you agree with any of that.
Yeah, I think I generally agree that there is a, because it is like, it is a Yuri series, and it is a fundamentally queer relationship between Kobayashi and Toru. Like, I've always read it, and it's much more clearly this in season 1, as Kobayashi is an asexual character. Like, that's just how she reads as ace to me. Like, that she wants and really needs this emotional relationship with Toru and Kana and this found family, but it doesn't read to me as her rejecting Toru's sexual advances because she is straight. It reads to me as she's doing this because she is ace, and she finds that kind of sexual encounter awkward. Because there are multiple moments in the series where she sort of invites a little bit of physical intimacy, but in this sort of more romantic way, in a less sexualized way. And in episode 8 is one specifically I think I put down in my notes, where this is the one where Elma comes in, and Elma then starts working at Kobayashi's job, and Toru starts to get jealous of this new kind of relationship that Kobayashi is developing. And that's when Kobayashi pats Toru on the head and tells her, hey, take the hint. And that to me is so defining of what Kobayashi's relationship is. It's very hard for her to be really open about her feelings. I think she feels very awkward about the sexual component of it. At the same time, she fundamentally understands Toru, even if I don't think Kobayashi would herself say it this way. She sees Toru as her life partner. And that's very much what season 1 is about. Like, it's notable to me that the end of season 1 does your sort of pretty standard plot point of this sort of show, where you take the fantasy girl, the manic pixie dream girl, whatever has come in here, you take that character away, the main character is then left with this life that is the life that they seemingly wanted to have, or the life that they used to have. We've seen this multiple times in Q&A, by the way. This is the disappearance of Suzumiya Haruhi. Beyond the Boundary ends this exact same way. This is just super standard. You have that, but here it's inflected in a very different way because Kana is still there. And so instead of it just becoming my sort of fantasy world has left me and now I need to sort of find a way to get it back, it's like my life partner is gone and I'm a single mother/father now.
It's specifically domestic. It's about details of the household and chores and like these things that you share with your life partner that aren't necessarily romantic or sexual, but are caregiving things people do for each other. It is all about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's leaning on those tropes and that imagery of like, now the laundry's not getting done. She's struggling to make breakfast. She's struggling to get Kana to school in the morning. All of those kinds of things. She comes back home too late and Kana's bored at home. These are all things you expect in a show about a like single divorced father or something like that. And that's a very different kind of ending. I've never seen a show like this spin that sort of standard cliche plot setup in that kind of way. And that's part of what makes that relationship feel so strong and compelling and so fundamentally queer and sort of, I'm going to say abnormal here, not abnormal in a bad way, but that it is not a heteronormative relationship in multiple different dimensions. Both in the dimension that they're both women, in the dimension that one of them is a dragon and one of them is a human, which is a little bit more of an extreme dimension, but also in the dimension of like, we're looking at more unusual forms of sexuality, one character being arguably even like hypersexual with Toru, the other character being effectively a form of asexual. And so the core storyline of Kobayashi's Dragon Maid and like the whole thing of this series is fundamentally about this question of how can people who are very different live together and coexist and build those relationships. And that's what the dragon-human bonding thing is fundamentally about. But that's a lens that you can use that reflects so many different kinds of relationships, or all human relationships that are always born from fundamental differences of all these different kinds, cultural differences, sexual differences, gender differences, philosophical differences, political differences, whatever, and trying to overcome those differences and discover love and discover these relationships is part of what the human experience is about. I think that's what this show is trying to explore. And that does, I agree, get diluted in Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid S, where it's not totally gone, for sure. Like, they're still there, but it is not as clear to the reading. It's like in that moment in episode 2, or that kind of subplot in episode 2 is a good one to zoom in on for this, where you have this whole, gag about Kobayashi gets a penis through Ilalu's magic spell. And I feel like the show's really desperately trying to walk a tight line or tightrope with that joke of making it like, it's not explicitly telling you or saying to you that having a penis makes her have a different kind of sexuality. It's trying to sort of dance around this like, well, maybe it's just she feels awkward having a penis, which would be awkward if you're someone who's never had a penis and now you have one all of a sudden and you don't know what to do with that. But it doesn't have enough of sort of like complexity in presenting it or spend enough time on it to really kind of figure out what is the space, what are you trying to say with this that is more than just, it's funny that Kobayashi has a dick now. Like, you know, I feel like Takemoto's version of the show, the tonal space that season 1 was in, would have, because it presumably would have had this gag in there. I mean, this was an episode that he had storyboarded in part. I feel like the tonal energy of it would have been very different and probably would have led into some kind of moment where you have one of the sort of more melancholy leitmotifs in the soundtrack play, and you have a character dramatically look out up into the clouds and monologue slightly about it. Like, season 1 is very self-reflective, and every episode has moments where characters are very self-reflective and think to themselves or talk to each other about these strange liminal feelings they're experiencing. And season 2 moves away from that in several ways. It's one of the places where the soundtrack change is very evident, is you just don't have that kind of music play as much because you don't have scenes dedicated to exploring those moments in as much depth. And so it runs into difficulties when you're running into exploring these kinds of weird, strange liminal relationships between characters, and you're turning up the gag meter up higher and higher, which is what happens with the dick thing. I agree that it ends up kind of quashing the queerer parts of the relationships in the show.
Yeah, and it's a disappointment, and I think I'm really glad to hear the way you put that all through the lens of asexuality, because it wasn't where my mind went, but you put into words what I was trying to say, I think, with that relationship. And I think it's so true. And obviously remembering that, you know, this is all literally on the spectrum of the acronym, right, of LGBTQIA. Yeah. And I think the show is trying to be representative of various parts of that, at least in season 1. And I think but it also opens itself up to other readings. Like, I think if you wanted to view it through a more like straightforwardly, you know, a queer or lesbian, you know, Yuri lens, I think you could do that. And I think part of the whole goal in season 1 aesthetically feels to me being inclusive in that way of like, not the kind of inclusivity of like, we're going to name it and tell you what it is, but of, I think the reader can read into that. And I do think season 2, again, in its general overtness, just tends to shut those down a little more. And I don't think it's necessarily doing it out of any kind of malice or anything. This does not feel like, you know, in Star Wars Episode 9, where they have to really hardcore no homo, Poe and Finn, and, you know, like really make that clear. Not Poe and Finn. Who am I thinking? I don't know. The characters.
I think that's them, right? That's the name of those two characters.
Poe Dameron. Yes, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
They're not that memorable. Anyway, but, but, you know, they were more memorable when they were gay with each other, and then they really weren't. They didn't like each other, and they both had girlfriends. This is not that, but I do think you can feel where season 2 is just a little bit more like gender essentialist. It's a little bit clearer in like the sexuality binaries it is coloring within, and it makes more kind of assumptions based on gender and sexuality, whereas there is just in the delicacy, in the kind of gentleness of season 1, and in that theme that you were cueing in on of how do people relate and connect across differences. I think a lot of people from very different walks of life and gender identities and backgrounds can see themselves in season 1 because of that delicacy in ways that season 2 start to feel a little more closed off to.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do, you know, but I think it is important also, you know, that for season 2, I think it's a nuanced thing, because it is, season 2 still does end with, the last thing in that season is Kobayashi and Toru in wedding dresses, you know, chasing through the forest. So it's still a Yuri relationship, but it does sort of quash some of these things in the more kind of the edges around the show, and it's the kind of nuanced ways in which things are presented. And I think that's one of the things that's interesting about watching these 2 seasons back to back, especially with all the homework we've done of going very thoroughly through the KyoAni's history up to this point, is it's easier to pick up on those more nuanced differences. Because I think if you casually watch the show, you might not notice that much, but that shift is definitely there.
And I think, again, coming on the heels of all the 700 episodes of Sound Euphonium we watched or whatever, I know that show wasn't actually that long, but we watched it over a long period. But going through all of that, like, if you were wondering, what did Jonathan really want out of Sound Euphonium with the kind of more Yuri relationship going on in it? I wanted Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid Season 1. That's, like, what it is, like, where I don't necessarily need the show to, like, name it and make it super explicit, but I also think you can do it without, like, clearly closing off avenues of readings. And I think Kobayashi Season 1 is, like, really, really good at this same-sex relationship that doesn't necessarily have to be overtly sexual for both partners, and it doesn't necessarily have to be named and identified on screen, but there are all sorts of readings, and there's all sorts of things in the atmosphere and in the show's discussion of identity that get to breathe. And that's what I wanted. And so I love that first season in part because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. That part of it is just giving it this real sense of emotional space that those slow down moments in season 1 have, that gives it that quality. Because the other, like, one of the other key relationships that is kind of in here and in that conversation is you also have Takia and Fafnir, right? As this same-sex relationship on the male end of things, where that's obviously not nearly as big of a focus. But it is it's one of my favorite parts of the whole show is at the end of episode 6, which is the Kigami Yoshiji episode from season 1, where the whole last segment of that episode is just Takia and Fafnir at home, and it's showing kind of their home life, and Fafnir constantly playing this game, but they, like, sleep in the same room right next to each other, and Takia, like, is kind of always there with him, helping him, and Fafnir is this very awkward person who's so closed off, and it ends with him having this whole monologue to himself, Fafnir, about how, humans are hits or misses. Most of them are misses. And if you want to figure out if someone's a hit or not, it takes a long, long time to figure it out. And then Takia comes out of the store and Fafnir tells him, hey, you're a hit. And then they walk off together. And it's not like they're not smooching or anything. It's not putting a clear name to that relationship. You don't even necessarily need to read it as a romantic relationship, but it is a relationship in which they cohabit and they, like, again, it's this sort of partnership quality that the relationship has that reflects something of Kobayashi and Toru's whole deal. And it's one of those things I really like about season 1. It doesn't spend a lot of time on that relationship, but the moments you get insight into it do, to me, lean into that much more queer-coded kind of space.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there is the overall, like, difference in humor style between the seasons. And this is where it is the funniest thing to me, because, like, it's just so clearly one of these men directed Lucky Star and one of these men directed Nichijou. Yes. And that's kind of all you need to know about the kinds of jokes. And I think a lot of this is just going to come down to, whatever your kind of taste is. But season 1 has a lot more of the jokes like Lucky Star that are very kind of that kooky K thing. They are atmospheric, they are quiet, they are uncanny. They're often very silly, but I wouldn't necessarily say zany. And what was funny to me is season 2, like, literally opens with something so much zanier than in season 1, with, like, the Maid Cafe, and there's, like, a whole scene where Kobayashi, like, spins in a circle and runs really fast out of the room, and there's more kineticism and motion, because I think that is just more of where Ishihara Tatsuya's brain goes. And then throughout the season you have, like, things that are just basically Nichijou, like, skits. The one in episode 12, the season finale of season 2, where they do the arm wrestling joke at the Little Cherry Blossoms Festival, and it's this whole, like, I wrote total mundanity elevated to operatic silliness with this major technical flex, because they have the camera fly around the two people arm wrestling and the barrel that they have their arms on and all this stuff. And I'm like, that's just a Nichijou segment. You could just redraw the characters as Nichijou characters and it would fit into literally any episode of Nichijou. It is so much that. And then you look at, like, season 1, the Kamike episode is so clearly a cousin of the Kamike episode in Lucky Star. Like, you could put them on a spectrum together and study them together. And I just do think that is funny how much that comes through and how clear the voices of these two directors are.
Yes, because it is fascinating, because it's just two very different kinds of comedy where you just get these little, like season one is like the comedy stuff is it's a lot of sort of like empty space and quiet and lazy moments and these in between moments, and then you just get these little tiny jabs, right? These little comments like that. That's like, oh, Christmas is nice, but I sure don't want to celebrate anything from that guy's son.
Yes.
And those kinds of little tiny bits and little kind of jabs or comments that are more the focus of the jokes. And then there's the kind of like standard running gag stuff that's just part of the background radiation of the show, of like Saikawa when she hugs Kana going Bwah! And exploding and that kind of stuff, right? Like those little moments are just there as like kind of connective tissue to the sharper little kind of comments and jabs in season one, whereas season two is much more over the top. It's much more zany. It's much more gag focused, I feel like, and like making these kind of big moments. And often I found myself laughing more at season two, just in the sense of like it feels like it's going for laughs more. It's going more for like, here's something big and crazy and ridiculous, and it's wanting you to really kind of laugh out loud at it. Whereas season one feels like it wants to give you a dumb little chuckle, and that's kind of like its comedic aspiration is for you to go like, ha, that was weird, and that's about it. Whereas like season two really is like going for it.
Yeah, and I think, you guys know I was the person who liked Lucky Star a little bit more than Nichijou, and so that kind of humor just tickles me a little bit more. But I also liked Nichijou a lot, and so like those scenes in season two are still enjoyable. When like they do a crazy technical flex on the animation and have like an insane dragon battle for like 90 seconds, like the best part of the episode that has the whole Elma flashback in season two, where about Toto and Elma, is their fight that they flash back to at the beginning of the episode, where apparently they did their like Godzilla breath down each other's necks.
Yes.
Which like I feel like if you put that in a kaiju movie, it would be the most violent thing to ever happen in a kaiju movie, because their bodies would just explode out into the camera. And if the episode had cut it off there and then stayed in the present day, that would be the best use of the dragon mythology stuff, to just this brief flashback of this fucking ludicrous battle. And they even do the Godzilla thing where like you see the like fire come up their belly through their neck, and all those things that like when Ishihara Tatsuya decides that he wants to do 90 seconds of Dragon Ball Z or whatever in his show, they will commit to it, and that is a wonderful thing. My taste leaned, and I think for this show, work a little bit more with the season one stuff. But if someone told me, hey, I liked season two more because the gags are bigger and I laughed harder, I'd be like, good, awesome, I'm glad you liked it more. Like it's not wrong. They're just different approaches.
Yeah, and I definitely think that for me, season one, the humor fits in better in the overall narrative. Whereas, like, I think the jokes are like funnier in their own right in season two, but they don't always feel like they serve the bigger kind of purpose of the show. In the way with like Nichijou, the bigger purpose of the show is just to make you laugh.
Yes.
So there's no other concern there. Whereas here, I feel like. And honestly, in some ways, it's a little bit similar to how I feel about sometimes the humor used in some other series like Chunibyo, Love Chunibyo, and Other Delusions, where sometimes the gag is so... You've gone so hard to get the laugh on the gag, you've maybe lost sight of the bigger picture of the story you're trying to tell and trying to explore, and that it's a very funny moment or a very funny episode, but it doesn't necessarily help the cause of the overall season. It's part of like my issue with like season two and stuff like that for that show.
I actually think the split between the two seasons of this and the two seasons of Chunibyo are pretty reminiscent, because I think I found Chunibyo season 2 funnier than season 1. I think it has more laughs. I think it's more creative with its jokes. The problem is it goes so hard on that when it gets into the more serious stuff, and it doesn't just go hard on that, but it also takes more of a shotgun approach in terms of how many characters it uses, how it'll do episodes just about side characters and stuff. So when you have to come back to the core emotional relationship with Yuta and Rika in season 2 of Chunibyo, it doesn't hit as hard. And I think a similar thing happens here, where because they have to go a little bit wider, they use more characters, they do episodes that are more about non-Kobayashi, non-Toru characters, that when you get to the segments that are like, now we're going to be sweet and serious, that division is harsher, whereas season 1, it never feels like there is a division. It's just kind of all part of the tapestry.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
So I think that's all the thoughts I had about kind of comparing the two seasons. Were there any other broad, like, Kobayashi's Dragon Maid versus Kobayashi's Dragon Maid S thoughts that you had?
I think that also is like, those are like the main things that I notice as well. Yeah, the humor is very different, and then like the kind of the tonal space that the shows are trying to explore. And then you have like some things that, honestly, I think some of this is not like a director stuff of where season one gets to have a much clearer package as a story because it's the first season, and so it has like a clear endpoint, whereas I think that's the thing that season 2 struggles with a little bit. But I also don't necessarily think that's an Ishihara Tatsuya thing. I think that's just where are you going to end? Like, there's no sort of clear point for this to stop in the way with season 1 gets to have pull Toru away and then bring Toru back and kind of like resolve that. I just have to imagine that the manga also likely just doesn't have a good landing point at this point in the story.
Yeah, and honestly, we've talked about this with a lot of shows. I think most shows in a kind of vein like this, anything vaguely slice of lifey, second seasons are hard.
Yeah.
Like, K-On! Season 2 is a miracle season of television because it sticks this landing.
Yes.
And it has graduation to aim for, but the problem is that it does tie up the main character arcs in season 1, so they had to figure out how in season 2 do we kind of keep the engine going, and they decided to focus on, more of the, I forget her name, but the underclassman character.
Awesome.
Azusa, and they make all these choices around that. They refigure kind of how the episodes work individually, and it's also a longer season, so they do all these things to make it like a really full-throated second season. I can't really say I've seen a second season of a show like this that does that as well as K-On! Season 2 did, and a lot of them fall more into this category.
Yeah, where season 2 just becomes a bit aimless because it doesn't have a landing pad anywhere.
Yeah.
And I do like the last episode of season 2 a lot, and I think it's like about the best you can do is just say, you know what, we had a fun time, we got to tell our stories with our characters, we got a bunch of good gags in, and then we kind of get to end on a nice little reflective episode. Is about as good as that's usually done without doing the K-On! Thing of kind of really reconsidering the entire structure of the show, because season 2 of K-On! Is kind of a different show from season 1.
Yes, absolutely. But I think we should talk about the characters, Sean, because these are fun characters, and they're fun in both seasons.
Absolutely. So let's run down our cast here. So we've got Kobayashi, we've talked a little bit about here already, but we have Tamada Mutsumi is the voice actress here for Kobayashi, who she has done a couple of pretty notable things. One, she's the kid version of everybody's favorite Naruto character, Kakashi Sensei, which is actually a pretty notable role. There's a couple of really long flashbacks in Naruto near the end where you have Kakashi as a little kid. And so that's a much bigger role than usually the like, oh, they're the kid version of this character from Naruto or One Piece or something that's in like one episode. That's like a pretty big thing. She has been in one other KyoAni show because she is in Nichijou. More specifically, she's in Helvetica Standard in Nichijou. She's the little baseball boy who's just one of the stock Helvetica Standard characters. If you see a picture of him, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Not the most, sort of incredible role in the world, but I just like that she's been in another KyoAni thing, and it's a fun little Helvetica Standard thing. She is Sayaka Kanamori in Hands Off the Eizouken, who that is the best character in that show. That's a great show, and it's an amazing character. She's Beelzebub in Sandland. That's the main character in Sandland.
She's very good in that. It's a great performance.
And then this is just like a fun little factoid of a thing I didn't know existed. She plays Hiromu Arakawa, which if that name sounds familiar, that's because that's the woman who's the mangaka for Full Metal Alchemist. She plays her in the adaptation of a series of shorts from an autobiographical manga called Hyakusho Kizoku, which is about Hiromu Arakawa growing up in Hokkaido doing farming, which if you know anything about her, you know that she's from Hokkaido and she farmed. And she grew up on a farm. So there's some sort of anime adaptation of that autobiographical manga, and Tamada Mutsumi plays Arakawa herself in that. It's just a little fun fact for you.
But it's a great performance. Again, the Edward Elric Romy Park connection makes it even funnier, the Hiromu Arakawa thing, because it does have that Romy Park quality of like, it is clearly a woman doing it, but it is masculinized, and I think it's just a great version of that kind of performance. Consistently kind of the calm center of things, although whenever Kobayashi gets drunk with her coworkers, obviously we have big outbursts that are very funny. But I think it's a very special performance, and it's a hard character to do because you don't get to be zany the way Toru or the others get to be, but she is still the heart and soul of the show and is great.
Yeah, I think Kobayashi is like the most important thing in the show because she's one of the things that makes this show very different than its sort of peers. There's no shortage of big, crazy moe slice of life comedy shows with sexy fantasy girls, right? Like, that's just the thing, that there is a billion of those kinds of shows. There was a billion when this series first came out. There's a billion of them still now. But almost all of them have a male main character, because that's kind of part of the point. And I think it's an essential thing to the DNA of Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid that Kobayashi is a woman. And it puts it into this queer space. It puts it into this sort of more interesting space that kind of elides a lot of the stock jokes and stock humor you would get from those other series, or it makes that humor have a very different tone or cadence to it. And so I do think that Kobayashi, just as a character, is so important to what this series is. And then, Tomoto Mutsumi just does an incredible job playing that character. It is a thing of where, when I watched it on Blu-ray and would occasionally forget to change it initially to Japanese voices, and I'd hear just a little bit of the dub, the other characters in the dub sounded fine to me. Kobayashi was just like, I can't, like, because it doesn't find the right gendered space for the voice in the English version, and I think that's just because it's a very, very hard thing to do. It's a hard space to find, and I just think, it's a really great, nuanced performance of just like a kind of a weird character that's just like one step to the left of what you'd expect the main character of this show to be, and that's part of what creates this kind of secret sauce of Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. But of course, we have our one title character, Miss Kobayashi, but we have our other title character, the Dragon Maid herself, Toru, voiced by the voice actress Kuwahara Yuki, who she's been in a couple of things I've seen that I like. She's Gareth in Fate Grand Order, which is a very fun character. They just put out the swimsuit version of Gareth for the most recent summer event, and that is a very fun character, and I did get her in the gacha, and I was happy about that. She plays Konoha in a very ridiculous but very fun comedy series called Gamers, that is not about gamers. It is like a ridiculous rom-com parody. If people have not watched that and you want a good comedy anime, I would recommend Gamers. It's very fun. And then she does also play Naho, who is one of the 3 little kid nurses at the Butterfly Mansion in Kimetsu no Yaiba, which is a very fun little character as well. But at the time, Kuwahara Yuki was a total unknown. This is kind of your standard Kyoto casting thing of grabbing someone who just had never really been in anything big at this point and giving her this character. And she just absolutely knocks it out of the park. I mean, she's the mascot of the show. She's the voice of the show. If you've watched any of the ancillary material around the show, like the commercials or the shorts or the radio show and stuff that she hosted when the show was airing, like, she's such an infectious presence, both as a person, but then also as the character of Toru, that like incredible energy she breathes into that character, because Toru is so extreme and so over the top and so kind of hyped up. I think it's just a very, very fun, very memorable performance.
She's so great, and it's so funny to think about this being a first performance, because it's a big performance.
Yes.
She's got to be like big and energetic and funny and sell a lot of jokes and talk extraordinarily fast at various points with a lot of like kind of heavy dialogue that I imagine is sometimes kind of a tongue twister. But then she also has to be very sweet and, sell just completely that she loves Miss Kobayashi, and that love sometimes is very sexual and inappropriate, and sometimes it is very, very pure, and she's able to do all of it, and obviously wonderful animation on that character too to do all of that. But this is the kind of performance where just the way she says things is often funny, even if there's not a joke behind it, and that's the sign of a good performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, that's one of the things I felt on the Blu-ray when I finished watching the show. I went to the special features and just watched all the commercials for the show, and almost all of them are voiced by her. And they're just fun to watch because her voice is fun to listen to. Her performance is like inherently entertaining and funny. It's just a great character, and it's also a great character design to kind of like center the show on as a kind of mascot. And that's part of where the animation on her is so fun, of the big flowing skirt but having the big fat dragon tail. I like how kind of big and burly her dragon form is. There's something about it's just got like this big meaty giant fucking dragon, which is cool. It's just a great character. But for me, the star of the show really is this next character, which is Kamui Kana, or just Kana as we know her. She is voiced by Naganawa Maria, who has a wide range of very, very adorable character roles in different shows. The two that really jump out to me is she's Komeko, who is, I'm blanking on that character's name. Who's the explosion mage in Konosuba.
I feel bad for not remembering this.
Yeah,
she has her own fucking spin-off, Sean.
Yes, Megumin. It's Megumin.
Yes.
So it's
when Thomas, who has Megumin posters on his walls, my brother, hears this, he's going to lose his mind.
It's like, I've got a lot of characters to remember off the top of my head. I should have put it in my notes that Komeko, who's Megumin's little sister in Konosuba, which if you watch the Megumin spinoff, she has a lot of Komeko in that, and she is fucking hilarious in that. And she's also one of the cutest characters in the history of anime, which is the platelet from the biological, like, educational show Cells at Work, which personify all the cells in your body. And platelets are obviously like the little things that kind of cause blood clots and stuff like that. And she's just this like adorable little girl who runs around with all of her buddies to make blood clots and stuff. This was her first starring role, was as Kana, and it is just the most adorable character in the history of anime.
Yes,
just watching this character and have her say anything, or just like half the time she doesn't really have lines, she just goes, "Oh," but just that, like that's enough to make me happy. It's just the most infectiously adorable character I think I have ever seen in anything ever.
I 100% agree, and I think the one thing that I feel like is completely consistent between seasons 1 and 2 is Kana. I feel like that is just, she is like the rock between the two seasons. And if anything, like, she anchors season 2 for me, because she does they have so many good Kana things. The best episode in the show, episode 10, or of that season at least, is the big Kana episode. The OVA is just like, episode 10 was so good where she went to New York and made a friend. Let's do a sequel to that episode. And it is fucking adorable. And yeah, basically anytime Kana is front and center, it is great, and even when she is in the background, it's also great. She is just adorableness personified. She is like the most moe character ever, especially in the, if you go with the definition of moe of the like want to protect, Kana we want to protect. Sometimes you have to take a step back and remember that she is technically a dragon who is probably older than most of the humans on Earth, but at least in the weird world of the show, she is a child, and we must protect her.
Well, I like the whole kind of story around her of like that, she, because of the way that their dragon society worked or whatever, she never really had a proper parental figure in her life. And so she's kind of run away from home. And so she, and obviously like whatever dragon development, who knows how that works of how long they're children or whatever. But the sense of her like kind of mentally being a child because she's never really had a family. And there's this sort of sense of her, she's almost kind of playing being a little kid, which I think works so well with the character. She wants to be a little kid and to have fun and make her friends with Saikawa and all that kind of stuff. And you think you get the sense that she understands what she's doing, that she's not like totally ignorant and truly naive or anything. She knows that she is playing at this thing, but she's having so much fun doing it, and she really needs to do it. And I think that's part of the thing that makes the character so much fun, is I think it definitely kind of like is able to do the little kid that's an ancient dragon kind of trope. I think it's able to just do that in a way that feels very fresh and compelling here.
Yes, and just several of my favorite episodes of the show are Kana-centric, and she rules, and I always want more Kana because she is the best. I'm going to skip ahead one character here, Sean, because I just want to mention her friend Saikawa was the funniest thing in the world to me, because when that character kind of comes in a big way in season 1, I went, wow, this character is exactly like Becky Blackwell from Spy Family, the friend of Anya at that school. I'm like, that's so crazy. And then I looked at your notes and I went, it's the same actress, because it is Emiri Kato who plays Saikawa, who is also Becky Blackwell in Spy Family. And I can only imagine that when they were casting Spy Family, they went, who should play Becky Blackwell? And someone had seen Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid and went, it's the same character. Let's do this woman who played Riko Saikawa. And I love that. And those two are so adorable together.
Yeah, absolutely. It is just like, it's one of my favorite running gags is her just sort of like not being able to contain how adorable Kana is and just exploding, and it gets more and more elaborate. That's probably like some of the best stuff in season 2 is some of those, they get incredibly ridiculous in that Nichijou kind of way of it's just so over the top. But, it's how adorable Kana is you need to have a character that's basically dedicated to just being like, oh my god, this is the cutest thing in the world, holy shit. And that's just basically Saikawa's whole character. But I love her to death. And it's one of the things that's fun is, Emiri Kato, yes, she is Becky Blackbell in Spy Family, but she is also Kagami Hiragi from Lucky Star. So we get an old school KyoAni actor back, and as part of the DNA of the show is Lucky Star, so it's fun to have one of the main Lucky Star actresses back playing this character of Saikawa. I also love Saikawa's design. I like any character that has like the big crazy forehead with the giant, like the light sparking off of it and stuff.
Yes.
She's incredibly fun.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like KyoAni regulars amongst the ranks of the like side characters, including the next one you had listed here, which was Fafnir, which is our boy Ono Daisuke. And fucking Fafnir rocks. I love this bizarre, like, death god character who comes to Earth and gets corrupted by video games. Fafnir rules.
Yeah, I love Fafnir, or Fafson, as, only his friends can call him. But yes, it's just fun to have Ono Daisuke back. He was in every KyoAni show, it felt like, for like 8 years or something, and then that kind of fell off a little bit. And it's something that's fun about Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid in general, is you get a lot of returning kind of old KyoAni actors coming back who hadn't been in something in a while for KyoAni. Obviously, Ono Daisuke had been in every other show in the intervening periods. But yeah, I mean, he's one of the OGs, going all the way back to Air, the main character in Air, which is one of his first roles. So it's fun to have him back in another KyoAni thing. And Fafnir is just so fun as a character, this like very kind of like dark, grumbling dude who is constantly threatening the death of everyone around him in the entire world, but all he wants to be is an otaku and do his little like idol dances and play his MMORPG. I love the episode where he first comes in and he sees like fake Dark Souls on the TV or whatever, and just like that's what he starts playing. And their fake version of Dark Souls is amazing. And it's just that slow thing of that character kind of just getting ingratiated into the world of humans through video games, and his love and friendship with Takuya, and all of that. He's not one of the main characters in the sense he's not like in every single episode, but every time they can focus on him and his slow development, I just always enjoyed.
Oh, I love it. And I love that it's particularly slow in season 1, where we get an intro from him and he gets to play the video game, and then he's gone for an episode or two, and then when he comes back, he's like, hey, can I play that game again? And you can just tell he's like itching for it. And I like how it builds to him like living with Takuya and becoming a shut-in fucking hikinomori gamer is fantastic. Of course, the other half of that equation is Takuya himself, who is fucking Nakamura Yuichi.
Yep.
Which is so cool. I mean, obviously we've talked about this actor a million times. One of the things I love here, though, is that it's so rare, I feel like he just gets to play some dude. Like, I feel like most of the time he is someone big, obviously. And in the roles we've talked about, like, Mr. Bushido in Gundam, Io Fleming in Gundam, Riccardo Fellini in Gundam, Gojo Satoru in Jujutsu Kaisen, whatever else. In fucking film, he's Japanese, the voice of Captain America. He plays, like, big characters. And even when he is in a smaller role, it tends to be someone with, like, an outsized personality, like a Riccardo Fellini. And I like that in this show, he's just a dude. He's just the guy who works at Kobayashi's company. And then in his free time, he is a freaky, weird otaku. But, like, it's just Nakamura Yuichi getting to do kind of a normal voice role and just kind of have fun in the background of scenes. And that's so cool, because I feel like that's not something you hear from him that much.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like kind of playing back to some of his original roles for KyoAni, like Okazaki and Oriki, that are a little bit more kind of underplayed, or don't like go to the like big, intense, super masculine voice that he has, and he has so many characters like that, which is a little bit, like his role, which I love this role in Sound Euphonium as Hashimo-chan Sensei, the percussion instructor. Not a big character in terms of appearance, or like number of appearances of the show, but a very big character in terms of the impact that character has, and that feels like a Nakamura Yuichi character you would think of, that has like this big impact. And yeah, Takuya is just this guy, and it's one of my favorite like beats in one of the episodes in season 2 is the whole thing where Shota kind of looks up to him, and Takuya's like, I'm just a dude. I'm just like a regular adult person. But of course, to this little kid, Takuya seems like this really cool guy who has all of his shit together, because he is by far the most mature and has a shit together character of anybody in the show, even compared to Kobayashi, who has her moments where she just gets blackout fucking drunk and wanders out into the mountains and meets a dragon. The way that Takuya just like, man, everything just kind of rolls right off of him. Like in episode 1 where Toru comes and gets Kobayashi after she's drunk, and Toru just turns into the giant dragon form. Takuya's never seen a dragon before, and he's just like, oh, whatever. It's like his mind is blown for a second, and then he just accepts it and moves on with his life. In the same way that, like, they bring Fafnir over to his place in season 1, and they're like, hey, can you take this dude in? Like, we need some place for him. It's like, sure, come in. Like, let's play some games. Like, let's do our otaku shit. Come on, buddy. And he just rolls with it, and it's so fun, and he is just a cool, regular dude. And then, Nakamura gets to break out some of, like, the goofier shit when he turns into the big otaku with, like, the spiral glasses and, like, the buck teeth, and he ends all of his sentences with dance, and he does all that shit, and it's very funny.
You can just, every day, Ansu, you can hear how much fun he's having in the booth. You can just tell those must have been very fun days to record, because he's just going with it, and yeah, I love it. Nakamura Yuichi, I feel like, is fairly unique in that he can be the absolute anchor point lead of a show, the biggest personality there, or you can kind of put him in the background, and he's fucking a great character actor over there, too, and I love him basically in any role we get him in, and It's awesome.
Yeah, and it's also just so much fun having him and Ono Daisuke as this pair. Like, They work off each other so well, particularly in that sequence at the end of episode 6, where it's just about the daily life of these two weird dudes living together in this little apartment, and it's just their life together. It's so cool.
Yeah.
So then one of our other pairs, so we've got Shota, who is voiced by Ishihara Kaori. So this, who she's played a couple of pretty notable characters. The big one that is like the exact same kind of voice as Shota, she plays the character Aladdin in the shonen series Maji, which is pretty good. That's kind of, I hadn't thought about that in a long time until I looked it up, and that would be a fun one to go back to at some point. It was a pretty good show. But you've got him, and then we've got Takashi Minami as Lukua, as our other member of that pair, who she has been in a couple of big things. She's Teresia von Estrella in ReZero, not a character that's in that show a lot, but makes a very big impression in the big flashback she's in. She's Megami in the Food Wars series, or Shokotaka no Soma, and then she's also, I watched a show recently, so it jumped out to me, Lilith in Machikado Mazoku, which that's a fun little comedy anime. But we have our other pair there.
We do have our other pair there, Sean, because Lukua has giant breasts. You keep giving these to me, and you're not realizing it. And here's the thing: we can be 8-year-olds about this and have fun with it, because the show is. The show has an 8th grader sense of humor about boobs, and I think in season 2 when we get Ilulu, I think it gets a little too like ridiculous and over the top. But I think with Lukua specifically, because she is the one like who is so clearly an outlier here, and it's like both seasons, both directors, everyone who works on it has a commitment to literally every time Lukua shows up in a shot or walks into a room, there will be a big joke where her boobs bounce up and down. And it is, to me, always in the same spirit as episode 1 of Myriad Colors Phantom World, where you have the big limbo contest where the character's boobs come up out of her bra and under the fucking limbo bar and all of that. And it is what Ishihara Tatsuya said in the interview you found about that, Sean, of just that it's just funny. It's just a funny thing about the human body. Like, I think, like, it is sexual, obviously, because they're winking at it and it's, it's fairly Yuri and all of that stuff. But it is also, to me, it is so kind of innocent in the way they do it with Lukua, because it is so over the top goofy that, like, this is not I'm uncomfortable in a way like Neon Genesis Evangelion sometimes makes me uncomfortable. This is stupid and silly, and I'm kind of here for it.
Yeah, I think I generally agree. I think, like, sometimes the Ilulu stuff in season 2, it goes too far. I think having 2 characters being that, like, is part of the thing that just puts it over a little bit over the line to me sometimes. But particularly in season 1, there's just such a commitment to the bit, because it's not just that they bounce, it's that, like, there's a whole dedicated sound effect for it and that kind of stuff. It just really commits to the whole thing. And there are a couple of legitimately, I think, very funny gags around it. One of them is in the Yamada Naoko episode, where there's a running gag where Shota, it cuts to it repeatedly, where he's having a dream, and it's like him getting like crushed by like a giant like mochi or something like that, and all the stuff. And then the payoff of it is and then of course in the real world, he's being crushed by her gigantic breasts as he's sleeping. And then they do it again with something else. They do it again. It's him as the dream, and he's like fighting a sumo guy. And then in the real world, it just shows him just like sumo punching her breasts. And it's like, that's a dumb joke, but I'm here for it. The best joke in that regard, though, and this one legitimately got a big chuckle out of me, is in the school festival the sports festival where it's the fucking scavenger hunt, and Shota like gets the message, he reads it, you don't see what it is, he looks around, he goes and grabs Luko and drags her over to the judge, hands the judge the paper with the thing he had to find on it, and you see it just says the words world class, and the judge just goes and it just cuts.
Yes.
It's like, that's such a dumb but fucking hilarious stupid little gag. But I think like season 1 is very good at staying, I think, at the right tonal place where it feels like it's all in, it's funny, it's very like kind of happy and poppy and weird, and it doesn't get into a particularly like leery or kind of gross space with it. I think it manages to kind of like walk that line really well. And I think season 2 has a harder time with it with Ilulu, and then there's some like other jokes of things like Kobayashi getting the penis and stuff like that starts pushing the tone into a place where it feels a little less kind of secure. And that's where I end up having a little bit of an issue with that sometimes.
Yes, I agree. And I think it's the humor becomes a little too repetitive on that with season 2, when you have 2 of your dragon characters whose visual gag is essentially the same thing. I think it's too much. And then also I like the presence of Hiroshimano in season 2 as the boy who's kind of paired up with Ilulu, but he's not a prepubescent boy who's afraid of sexuality. He's a teenager whose nose bleeds every time he sees Ilulu, and I think that also just pushes it outside of, I think, the comfort zone here, because it is, I think, totally fine and fair to laugh at the absurdities of the human body, especially when it is a cartoon where you have drawn people who could never possibly have those proportions in real life. It's fine. It's silly. Yeah. It's like Popeye having a big dumb arm. You can have silly things with it. I think when you start to like overdo it or tie it into too many sex jokes, then it does start to get a little leery and is not your or my taste. I don't think this show ever goes like offensively far with it, but I think season 2 goes too far with it.
Yes. Though I will note, when I was doing my research on the mangaka and some of that stuff, and I was looking at some of the other manga he made, there's one title that jumped out to me that is this manga is not safe for work. If you want to look it up, you can. But the title jumped out to me, and I ended up looking at it. And the title is Chichi Chichi. And if you know any Japanese, it's not talking about Goku's wife, and that's not talking about anybody's dad. And it is, if you are into that, there's a whole, this guy, Cool Kyoshinja, he made a whole manga. If you want that, he made a whole manga about it.
I Googled this, Sean, and the first result is the database on Manga Dex, where I think there are a bunch of fan translations, and the tagline it has under Chichi Chichi is, "A girl and life to live, ... enormous breast paradise."
That was the sense I got from what I saw.
Yes.
So,
all right.
Yeah, the manga seemed to lean further into that. I think KyoAni kind of like, not to say, like, I don't think the manga never, anything I saw went into the NSFW kind of territory of Chichi Chichi, but it went more into the leering territory based on what I saw. I think KyoAni found a way to pull that back and find more of the humor in it with Luca and Shota. And so, yeah, I generally like those characters. And Shota, I think, is one of the characters that season 2 does a particularly good job with. Like, yes. Of the characters that they like, season 2 expands a lot on the side characters. I think Shota is more just kind of there for the gag in season 1, and he feels like a much more fleshed out person. It's one of the things I do like about season 2, is to kind of do more with him there.
I like the just idea that Shota, everyone else is in this pair with a dragon that is very affirmative and consensual, right? Like Toru and Kobayashi want to hang out together. Fafnir and Takia, they're having a great time gaming. Shota wants to be anywhere else. He hates this. He thinks she's a demon. He doesn't like this, and it is funny, especially because like, she's not actually like, molesting him or anything. That would be very not funny if they were doing that. But it is just this, he is just deeply uncomfortable around this demon woman who actually has very innocent intentions, but she doesn't look like she does. And so it is a silly series of jokes, and I do like Shota-kun. He's a good kid who will grow up needing a lot of therapy.
Yes, indeed. He's going to have to unpack a lot of stuff later in his life.
Yes.
Then we have our other dragon, our sad, lonely dragon who doesn't have a human. I don't know. I wonder if the manga ever pairs Elma up. But we do have Elma, played by Takeda Yuki, who we've seen in a couple of things. She is Felshi in Mobile Suit Gundam Witch from Mercury, who is the MVP of that series, who saves oh god, I'm blanking character names all the time, but the main squeeze or main boy, pink hair boy, his life gets saved by Felshi movie with that series, which is a clutch save. She's also Alba, the main character in New Game, which is a series I really like, and she's also Akamatsu in Mitsubishi Colors, which is a very, very funny comedy series if you want to watch that. And Elma is another character I think that works really well in season 2, in particular, outside of the flashback episode that goes too far. In season 1, she's a bit more on the edges because she's introduced pretty late. I think it's like episode 8 is when she comes in. But I do like her. I like the performance in particular, and I like the jokes about her trying to figure out how to operate in a human office with other human beings, and like that whole side of the show. I do think there's a lot of good comedy material there.
I love Elma. I do think there's, like, untapped potential with Elma. Like, we get that episode late in season 2 where she is trying to become, like, a labor activist in the office. And it's great and it's funny. And I'm like, more of this. Like, I don't need the stuff with her and Toru being rivals as much. I don't need the flashback about her being a dragon. I think they go into, like, she's really into sweets at the end of season 2 that feels like it kind of comes out of nowhere. But, like, this is a great joke. Like, because that's an area where we don't really have, like, you know, Toru is working as a maid. I don't think Lukoa works at all. But then we have over here Elma is choosing to live in humanity as an office drone is a weird, funny thing. And I'm like, I wanted a little more of that by the end of the series, just because it comes in late and it's such a great idea.
Yes, and that is definitely one of my favorite bits in season 2 is her inspiring this whole crazy labor movement in her office just so she can go out and get like the limited edition cookies or whatever the fuck it is. And yeah, that whole thing is very, very good. And then we've got a couple of other characters here. So we have one character who's not in the series a lot, but makes a big impression, particularly her appearance in season 1 when she first shows up. I love, which is Georgie, Saikawa's older sister, who is voiced by the great Gotuza-sama, Yuko Goto herself, who was, of course, was Mikuru in Haruhi. For people who don't remember, we talked about this when we talked about her roles in Haruhi and Lucky Star, that she ended up taking a break from voice acting for 2 to 3 years, from 2012 to 2014, because she had health issues, basically. And this was one of her first big things she did after she came back into voice acting, was Georgie. And she's also the teacher at the school, which is not like a named character, but you hear her voice basically every episode. And it's very nice having her back because she just was not in anything for a very long time. And I fucking love Georgie. I love this whole crazy character of this high school girl who's just so obsessed with maids, and it's her whole life, and she's changed her name, and she's like serving her little sister as if she was her master and all this stuff. But it's like a legit maid, not your otaku maid cafe bullshit. Like, it's like actual proper, like down to like the century, and I've picked this exact costume. And I think that bit with this character I find incredibly funny.
That's so good. I love Yuko Goto. I recognized her immediately. That voice is just so singular. I was going to say she should be in everything. I know for her health reasons, she's not in everything. But she should be in as much as she can within the limits of health, because she is awesome. It's kind of funny, Sean, just the other day, I was going through there's a bit in my dissertation where I explained the Gotoza-sama joke. There's a whole thing behind it. But I've been revising my dissertation. One of the things as I go through is I'm figuring out where do I need to add some images to help illustrate things. And when I got to that, I went, I need to put an image of the Gotoza thing in here, it'll make more sense. So then I have my Lucky Star DVDs on my desk, because I went and dug this out of a box in the garage, because I just moved, so I could get screenshots of that, and got to watch that scene again and enjoy it. And, God bless Yuko Goto. She rocks, and there should be more Georgie in this show, because she's great.
Yeah. One of my favorite jokes, I think this happens in season 1. It's just one of like the brief little cutaways, but there's like this brief little cutaway to her at school. And it's like one of the other girls is like saying whatever her actual like birth name is over and over again. And she just goes, Georgie. And then the girl turns around and is like, yes, what? And it's like, do you even remember what your name is anymore? And I just love the idea of this of Georgie having gone so fucking far. One of my favorite jokes in season 2, I think this is episode 6, season 2, is the one where at the end, they all go to the amusement park, and Georgie is there as like a maid adjacent role at every single thing. Like she's the mascot character and she's in the like haunted house and all that kind of stuff. And there's just something with about Georgie and her need to serve people as a maid that's almost like psychopathic that I think is very funny.
Abso-fucking-lutely. Love her. And who else we got, Sean?
Okay, so then we've got, in terms of our second season characters, we have Ilulu, who's voiced by Miniuchi Tomomi, which I found this interesting when I was looking up the voice actress. I think she does a very good job as Ilulu, but she has retired from voice acting for unspecified reasons. She retired in 2022. She played various characters, mostly in video games. She had a major character in the Uma Musume gacha game series. One of the big characters in Heaven Burns Red, which is connected to the Key stuff. It's a kind of a modern gacha game made by Key in that storytelling style. But she retired from voice acting in 2022, and all of her older characters that are ongoing have been recast. So I don't know why. Obviously, that's private, and she can do what she wants. I just found it interesting because it's very unusual, because she's very good in this. And Ilulu, I think some of like the boob stuff goes a little bit too far, but I do generally like Ilulu, particularly when they move more into her like going and working at the candy shop with the kids and all that kind of stuff. Like that stuff worked really well for me, and I liked that. And it's something that like I feel kind of like with Elma, I feel like there's a lot more territory there that I'm sure the manga goes into, that like having her be more fully integrated into the overall cast of the show. That I think like S, even though she is nominally like the new main character of the show that S adds in, it still feels like she's a little bit too on the sides to me, that I wish that they found a little bit of a better way to fully integrate her, to feel like she's a more essential part of the main cast. But the stuff that is there with her, I think, is really fun.
Yeah, I kind of found this character a dud. I didn't find her very funny. I think there's some uses of her that are better than others. Like, I think I agree the candy shop stuff tends to be better, and there's some good stuff there. But overall, it just felt like we never got to a point where I felt like I understood her kind of place in the gang. Like, she is technically living with Kobayashi and Kana and Toru, but I don't feel like she ever kind of has a place in that family or the metaphor of the family that they build with that. So I don't know, maybe if there was a third season and maybe deeper in the manga, the character would like click for me more. I think the performance is good. I think, the character design other than the giant boobs is decent. I do think there was a chance for a really good joke there because she comes down to our realm, to Earth, unfinished. Like, she still has her dragon claws, and at first she doesn't know how to make hands, which is a very good joke. Yes. But like, she has the ridiculous giant breasts. I thought the obvious joke there would be she sees like Lukoa and goes the other direction and like shrinks them down, and that would have been funny because they're so ridiculously big. I feel like the only joke you can make with them is she realizes it's a problem and has to fix it, but they don't do that, and I think that's a little weird.
Yeah, so they sort of lampshade it where when they're talking about can she make human hands and all that kind of stuff? I think Toru says it's like, oh, well, the boobs, like, that's about as far as she can go. And Kaguya's like, what do you mean?
Yes.
And it's sort of, obviously it's sort of lampshading that's, part of the thing with the character and this mangaka in general, is he leans on that side of various sorts of fetishes, I suppose you could say.
And look, one of my favorite manga / anime of all time is One Piece. I got no room to complain here. It's, Nami and Robin both seemingly got breast enhancement surgery in that time jump, and I worry about their backs, and I just hope they're okay. So, this is not a problem unique to this show, let's say. But yeah, I don't hate Lulu or anything. I don't think she like drags down the show. It just didn't quite click for me.
Yeah, it's just because I think the big thing is that it feels weird that she's still living with Kobayashi, because she doesn't feel like she's a member of that family in the same way. And it feels like she should have moved in with Take or lived with the grandma or something at the candy shop. Because once they move her into that orbit, it feels like, oh, this is kind of where this character belongs. But by the time you do that, there's not enough space in the season to develop it anymore. And it's like one of the things about S that feels a little bit awkward is that she is the new character added to the main cast that feels like should be the character that the season is about. And they've never fully landed that character. And I am kind of curious with the manga exactly what happens with them. I do think she does get that incredible gag, though, where she makes the dumb little gag cartoon hands that are just little nubbins, and then there's the bit where Toru's like teaching her like how to be a human, and she grabs the paper and flips it over, and Toru's like, how can you grab things with those hands? Like, oh, well, they're made of millions of tiny little hands. And then the camera zooms in all the way, and it's like the most disturbing image in the world of like all these little hands. It's one of the ones where you want to have a Blu-ray so you can get all the definition. You don't want, the streaming algorithm is going to break the fuck up because there's too much information. You want to see all those little tiny hands all wiggling around. It's incredibly gross, but it's an incredibly funny joke.
Very much a Nichijou joke.
Yes, 100% Nichijou joke. Yes, so we talked about it a little bit there, but we have Taketo, or Take, voiced by Shimano Hito, who is the well-meaning teenage boy that is there to ogle at Ilulu a little bit. And this is another character that I feel like he comes in too late into the show to fully develop, but what is there, I do think, like, generally works. I just wish that side of the show was more fully developed. I talked about it earlier, but I love his little dance he does in the opening, though. That's 2 thumbs up little dance.
And I always love Hiroshima. This is 100% his Zenitsu voice.
Yes.
And Kimetsu would have already come out when they did this season, I guess. So yeah, it is just literally his Zenitsu voice, but it's good. I mean, if you want someone to do that kind of voice, he is the best at it. So get him.
Absolutely. And then we've got also some KyoAni vets coming in to play some relatively small roles, but they're ones I want to point out. So you have the Harmony Dragon Clamine, I think is how you're supposed to pronounce that, from episode 2, where that's the dragon chasing Ilulu around that then gets his shit kicked in by Toru, voiced by Tomokazu Sugita, who's just was like a fun little Sugita cameo in a KyoAni show. It's been a while since he was in a KyoAni thing. It's fun to have him pop up, and I do like that little scene where he realizes he is incredibly fucked up when he hit Kobayashi, because Toru comes in and just seemingly, I think she says that she didn't kill him, but it looks like she fucking killed that guy. Yes. She rips his horn off or something, which is pretty brutal. It's a fun little, just a fun little character that Sugita just gets to play a shit-eating villain for one episode, which is fun. And then you've got Chloe, who is in the New York episode and the OVA, who's voiced by Urasaki Sumine, who, of course, we saw her in Love Chunibyo and Other Delusions as Dekomori. So fun to have her back as well, playing Kana's other little buddy. And I really love that character, and that whole... Yes. That first half of that episode and the OVA are some of my favorite things in season 2.
In either season. I just think it's great. And Chloe is a character who only appears twice, but really pops. To the degree that I have to believe that OVA exists because they knew they had something special in episode 10. Maybe there's another manga chapter, but I assume there's lots of manga chapters they could have done for the OVA because the manga has run for a long time. But I'm glad they did the one they did, because if they wanted to do a whole 3rd season that was just Kana and her adorable friends having adventures, walking on lines and jumping from the lines to the manhole covers, go for it. I would watch those, no questions asked.
Yes, and Saikawa getting a second adorable girl for her to just freak out over in the OVA is pretty funny.
We worry a little bit for Saikawa's health. I think she would faint. It would be bad for her, but
she's got Georgie there to take care of her. It's
true. It's true.
She's very blessed.
So Sean, speaking of that, I want to talk about my 2 favorite episodes. And if you have other favorite episodes you want to talk about, we can do those too. I think we'll agree these are 2 favorites, but my favorites in the whole series, and I think it tells you a lot about what I like from this show, is episode 11 of season 1, which is the year-end New Year episode, which is Yamamura Takiya's episode, that I wrote in your notes here that, oh my god, Yamamura Takiya has his own Someday in the Rain now, because that is what that episode is to me. Mm-hmm. It is the most low-stakes episode of the whole show. It is it's the New Year's break episode. They win this kotatsu at a local raffle, and they're just hanging out. The kotatsu is like the heated blanket around a table in a Japanese house, and they're doing that. They go watch the first sunrise of the year. It's like nothing happens in that episode. You couldn't put anything on a plot summary. It is just sort of daily life, and I think it is so gentle and so perfect, and to me says so much about how far Yamamura Takiya has come as a director, because I've loved watching his whole progression, and it's just a great one. And I do think my other favorite episode in the whole series is episode 10 of season 2, which we've mentioned several times, which is kind of the flip side of that episode to me, because you have Kana goes to New York, which is kind of a big, high pitched idea to have. But it's ultimately very simple. It's that she has run away because she had an argument with Kobayashi, which we never actually see the source of. And she meets Chloe and flies her to Minnesota. I don't think they maybe quite understood how far Minnesota and New York are, but that's fine. She says it's past that lake over there.
Yes, the way she describes that, I was like, yeah, okay, Japanese people don't have a concept of how big America is. It's like, fair. There aren't many countries that are ridiculously huge, so...
Yes. But then the second half of it is just Kana and Kobayashi kind of recuperating their relationship of, like, they had this dumb fight. No one really talks about it, but they just enjoy each other's company on a weekend. And they're looking at manhole covers, and Kana saves a ladybug. And those two episodes, they're my two favorites of the whole series. I think they're both pretty much fucking perfect. The episode 10 is an Ogawa Taichi episode, and they are such good little symphonies of the mundane and the liminal. And, if other people have other favorite episodes, I totally get it, but, like, this is where my heart lies with this kind of thing, and I adored those two.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, like, episode 10 is definitely my favorite of season 2. I would say it's that one and the finale are by far the two best of Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid S. For season 1, I think probably my favorite episode is episode 6, the Kigami Yoshiji one, although that one, the one you pointed out, episode 11, is fantastic. I mean, season 1 has so many good ones.
Yeah, they're all
also
good.
Love episode 10, which is the Christmas one where they put on the ridiculous fucking play that they've just mashed together like 500 different stories, and you have all the old people there who just think it's fucking CG. That's what the play is, and that's a like fun little bit.
The gag of starting with the little match girl, which is like one of the most dour Christmas stories you can tell, and then going to, we're going to bring 47 Ronin in, the Chushingura.
Yes.
Oh my god. And in the middle, of course, they have the whole magical girls thing. That is probably the funniest thing in season 1 in terms of just laughing out loud.
Yeah, just like the way it just sort of slowly spirals out of control. But then, of course, it all works out in the end because all the old people really love it. One little detail about that one that I fucking adore is that it's Fafnir's the one who comes up with we should put in the magical girl stuff. But he calls them majoko, which is like the word you would use it like super early in like the 70s and early 80s before Maho Shoujo became the standard Japanese way to refer to it. So it's like a little witch girl is kind of what they're saying there instead of what you normally think is magical girl. And it's such a great character detail that he's such a hardcore fucking otaku that he's going through the term majoko instead. And it's like, that's fucking great. I
would love to know if that's if that joke is from the manga or who on the KyoAni staff came up with it. I wouldn't put it past Takemoto Yasuhiro.
Yes. But
I bet there's a lot of people at KyoAni who are when you see characters like Takia and the Kamike episodes, you realize there's a lot of hardcore otaku at this company.
Oh, yes, 100%. I think one of the other favorite ones I have from season 1 is episode 4, which is the one where Kana goes to school. That's another Yamamura Takia episode. That one is just delightful. I mean, so much of that one is just the process of going and getting the school supplies and all of that, and just the time spent on that is like half the episode, and kind of wanting to go get like the cute things from they go to a different store, and then they have to go to this one store because that's the one that has the uniform that the school wants everyone to wear, and it goes into all the details of that, which is delightful. And then that's the one that in the back half gets into this ridiculous dodgeball game where Saikawa gets into a fight with these dudes at the like local fucking playground, and I love it because it's like there's this one guy who's just this cliche asshole character who's just being an absolute dick, and all the other ones is like, why are you being so mean? Like, it's like we can all just play, and then eventually Saikawa makes some sort of like insulting comment, and all of them kind of turn. And then of course it just ends with this crazy giant dodgeball game where all the dragons get involved and it just all goes to shit. But that one is fun because it's got both sides of it. It's got like the very slow, just like lazy tone piece of going and just getting all the school supplies for Kana. And then the other part of it is this very weird, long, surreal rolling gag about this weird dodgeball game that's playing on like character cliches and stuff like that. And then the big, ridiculous, like kind of dodgeball match using all the incredible animation they've got.
Yeah, and I don't want to give short shrift to episode 6, which you said was your favorite, because that one is that's a Kigami Yoshichi one, so of course beautifully directed, but it is also like, it's all hits. That's, I think, where we meet Georgie, right,
Yes.
for the first time. You have Lukoa has a big role in this one, and I think it's where Shota-kun comes in, and all of that stuff. It's where the moment you mentioned earlier with Fafnir saying Takia is a hit, that episode is just top to bottom great.
Well, that one's just like from a scripting, because it's my favorite one of the overall series. And like the big reason why is that from a scripting level, it's so solid because it is an episode in 3 parts. It's effectively a triptych. The title of the episode is Home Visit and Homes Not Visited. And it's visiting each of the other pairs, right? So you've got going to Saikawa's home, which is the first time we've gone to her home. And so you have all the stuff with her, Saikawa and Kana, and you meet Georgie as part of this. And it ends with this whole scene with like the Twister game that Saikawa freaks out about. And there's this little melancholy moment of her being like, well, what did Kana want to do there? Because it's like this very intense, intimate moment between the two of them. And then Kana's staring out the window and she whispers something to herself, but you don't hear what she's going to say. But it sort of like communicates how much, Saikawa is to Kana what Kobayashi is to Toru, right? Like Kana has like found her human, and I think you really feel it in that moment. Then the middle part of the episode is all the Lukoa and Shota stuff. This is where you really meet Shota for the first time, and you get all the gag of like him being freaked out that she's some sort of like demon succubus, and Lukoa doesn't know what to do about that. And it also ends with this fun little gag about Kobayashi as she leaves, realizing, wait, Shota's dad is the president of our company, which is a weird thing that doesn't pay off until later. And then you get the last section of the episode, which is all the Takia and Fafnir stuff, which is to me the real heart of the episode. And you also get all this like imagery around the rain that permeates throughout the episode, where you have the Teru Teru Bozu that they put up to try to like stop the rain, and then they go out in the rain, and that's when they see Takia and Fafnir across the way under their umbrellas. And there's just this something about the mood of this episode and the triptych structure of looking at all these different dragon-human pairs and how they're kind of connecting and coming together and kind of overcoming their distances and learning how to kind of coexist. And that being expressed through the rain, that is this thing that like, connects everybody. It rains on everybody. The rain permeates the whole world. And it being this thing that seemingly is kind of dour and hard to overcome. It's this thing that, like, traditionally you'd see as this negative thing, but Kana looks out at it and is happy that the Teru Teru Bozu worked and did not stop the rainstorm because she says she loves the rain. And you just get these long pondering shots of it raining outside and it dripping into these big puddles. And, Kigami Yoshiji is a guy who, like, one of the things he made his name for as an animator early in his career was doing water animation. So you get all this very luscious animation of puddles forming and raindrops dripping into these puddles that have formed, these images of pairs of birds hiding out in the rain or flying through the sky together, rain dripping off of the flowers, and then our 3 main characters staring out the window out at the world of the rain, and then it panning up to a close-up of the Teru Teru Bozu that are all shaped and look like our 3 main characters. And it's just such a great kind of summary of the themes of this overall series about the interspecies communication of people with these differences coming together and learning how to coexist, presented by showing us these 3 vignettes with 3 different pairs. And I just feel like it's a perfect example of how good Kigami Yoshiji is as a visual director and a storyboard artist, of being able to combine those 3 threads so elegantly, and then in this final little piece with the 3 characters inside reflecting on the rain, bringing that all to this like very powerful thematic conclusion. And this is, the last Kigami Yoshiji thing we're going to talk about in terms of something he directed. It's one of the last episodes he made, and it's just like, it's so good, and it's such a great episode that has so much thematic richness in what is also a very like silly show that has a bunch of the very silly jokes in it as well. It's just incredible. It's so good.
Yeah, great episode. Like I said, my favorite is probably 11, and just to say slightly more on that one, the New Year's one, is the theme it really hones in on is the family aspect of it. And it is about sort of this found family of Toru, Kobayashi, and Kana going through sort of the New Year's rituals and doing things like they're making the mochi, and then it's about Toru sharing the mochi with the neighbors, and Kobayashi gives Toru and Kana their New Year's allowances in cash, which is such a sweet little thing. But it's also where you start to realize something that really pays off in the final scene of the finale, which is that Kobayashi is not estranged from her actual family, but she is distant from them. And for reasons that, like, it seems like it's not like anything happened. It's just that she has grown distant and hasn't been active enough in that. And of course, I think the perfect, ending for the season is what they do, which is she introduces her sort of new family to her biological family, and I love that as an ending. But I also love this episode, and I made the Someday in the Rain comparison because it reminds me of that, where Someday in the Rain is about the casual intimacy and comfort that has come with all these people in the SOS Brigade, and it is about the ability, and I think it is one of the most profound things in the human experience of enjoying a rainy day where nothing happens together and the people you can do that with. And episode 11 is about, enjoying kind of the doldrums of the new year with people and how that brings you together. And it's also a very funny episode, but again, expressing those ideas, it's so cool how it's able to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's a good episode to pick out of that kind of the really unique tonal space of season 1 that season 2 struggles to kind of recapture in places that, it is an episode that it does have gags in it, but that's not the thing that stands out about the episode. The thing that stands out is the everybody lazing together under the kotatsu, where it's like the conversation about family and sending the greeting cards back home and Kobayashi's mom calling her. Yeah, and I think you're right. That's such a good episode to zoom in on in terms of how it reflects the very interesting, strange tone of season 1. That one really stands out.
Yeah. And again, it's the same, and it's part of why I like episode 10 of season 2 so much, is I think it really recaptures that, particularly in that second half, and the relationship Kana and Kobayashi have. And the fact that the reconciliation that comes with them is not like a verbal sit-down, let's talk this out. It's just the ability to enjoy this rainy day and going to run errands and, Kobayashi indulging Kana. And indulging sounds like she doesn't want to do it, but having fun with Kana going and finding all the manhole covers and things like that. That's perfect for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And then episode 10 also does have all the fun stuff of them going to Manhattan, which is great.
Yes.
I'm very curious if they actually sent someone to Manhattan for visual reference. I mean, obviously it's such a filmed location that you could get reference remotely, but outside of one sequence that intentionally feels like it is going in a different direction, in general, I've been to Manhattan multiple times. It feels like, oh yeah, I know where this is. Obviously you have Times Square, but you have some other locations, like one of the subway stations that's oh, I know exactly where this is. I have been in this spot. And it feels like it's an authentic representation of Manhattan. And I love all the Americanisms in there. I love, that Kana fucking has a skateboard, and they have the whole fisheye lens skateboard video effect on it. They go jazzercising in Central Park. They get a fucking hot dog. There is a big, ridiculous advertisement for Deer Cola. That there are 2 different Deer Cola advertisements in Times Square, which is, as American, we all know that Deer Cola is our favorite drink. And you have
there's
all that
also
stuff.
You forget about the best part, which is that for the brief period where people are speaking English, they're clearly Australians.
Yes.
And it's so funny. It's the people speaking English have Australian accents, and it's so thick. And obviously, if you're Japanese, you're not going to hear that. But if you're American, it's those people are not American. Those are Australians.
It is very funny that there's some white blonde dude running the hot dog stand who's some white blonde Australian, where it's just there might be a white blonde Australian dude running a hot dog stand in Times Square, but probably not. It's a much more kind of it's an ethnically diverse city, but maybe not with the Australians as much. I don't know. I didn't meet anybody who was Australian when I was in Manhattan. It's not really what I would expect in terms of demographically who you'd see represented there. But I do love the one brief little moment where they seemingly get transplanted to 1970s fucking gritty crime New York Manhattan, where Kana takes some sort of weird wrong turn, and this is where you get into the whole thing where you have Chloe who's being chased by all these thugs who are with the mob apparently, and obviously that's all very ridiculous that they've seemingly kidnapped some Minnesotan rich girl and taken her to Manhattan for undisclosed reasons. All that is very ridiculous. And I do love that you do just get this old school vision of crime-ridden Manhattan that is not at all what it looks like anymore. Like, you are not going to find an alleyway that looks like this in modern day Manhattan. It is very, very funny. And then, of course, you have the whole big sequence at the end where they're in a warehouse from, like, a Batman cartoon with, like,
yes.
you know, where they've kidnapped the girl and then kind of shows up as a dragon and just fucks their shit up. And it's great. Like, I love all that stuff. It's so fun.
So fun. I love that it just shows that, you know, maybe they don't have a huge experience with various U.S. states, because I love that, okay, rich girl, where's she from? Minnesota. That's famous for all the rich heiresses of a company that might be, you know, arrested by the mafia, but also that she's not from, like, Minneapolis or, you know, any, like, city in Minnesota. She's just from the state Minnesota, which is one of the biggest states geographically in the Union.
Yeah, I do love that she, when she shows up in the OVA and she mentions it at the candy shop, that Take knows, he hears Minnesota, he's like, wait, Minnesota, that's in America. I'm like, hey, good on you. I wouldn't necessarily expect someone who's not American to know what the fucking Minnesota is. It's not the most famous of the American states, I would think.
No. Anyway, but yes. Oh man, any other, like, favorite episodes or moments from this show you want to single out?
I think we hit on a lot of the big ones. Like, again, like episode 13, I really love all the stuff of the, like, divorced dad stuff. When Toto leaves is fantastic.
I want to mention in episode 8, which is of season 1, which is where we meet Elma. That is the episode also where we have the bento cooking competition,
yes,
which is just a great series of gags. Kobayashi wins the first round because Toru makes this, like, whole salad that takes up the whole box, and Toru just puts, like, a grape tomato in there, and that's great. Toru wins the second round because everyone loves Hamburg steak, and then Toru goes to the other world to get her fruit for round 3 and gets disqualified, and that's just a wonderful series of jokes.
Yes, that one is very, very good. Yeah, I think we hit on all my big ones. You know, we talked about the sports festival has the world-class gag, which that's always going to maybe crack up. We have a Comic-K episode. You can't have a Takemoto episode or a Takemoto series without a Comic-K episode. Even Nurse Witch Komi-chan that was only 3-episode OVA, and that had a Comic-K episode, and Comic-K turned into a giant transforming robot. So, you know, you got to have one. And it's very
Even
fun.
Hyoka is not, they don't go to Comic-K, but it is about a group of people who have to put together, like, a self-made publication and sell it. Yes. And that is a giant arc of that series. And I do love the joke that Fafnir puts together a book of real curses and no one buys it. And so for the second year, and there's a great joke in the second season, he does it with manga illustrations. Still no one buys it, but it is grisly and horrifying. And Shota gets one of the copies mailed to him and is just scarred for life even more than he already is.
Oh yeah, that is a pretty good moment in season 2 where they follow up on the Comic-K episode and they have him use Luca as a model, but he draws this, like, it's very intentionally a Junji Ito style horror manga. Yes. Like, they make a specific reference to one of his characters that's a recurring character, like, I forget what his name is, but it's like this curse boy that they use there. And it's like very good, and Luca just being very put out by being turned into some weird, scary Junji Ito snake lady. But yeah, I love the idea of Fafnir selling his real curses that if anyone actually bought it would be able to curse someone to death. But luckily nobody wants to buy his weird curse book.
Indeed. All right. Anything else to say about Miss Kobayashi's Maid Dragon/Dragon Maid before we wrap up the final show we're reviewing this season?
It's a delightful, weird little show. You know, that's something
yes.
We're, like, revisiting it. It just made me really appreciate, especially for season 1, though also for season 2. It's just a bigger part of season 1 is that really unique tone, you know, where it's taking all these different elements of different kinds of genres and putting them together in a weird way. You know, there's an element of how it's a sort of isekai anime in reverse that I really adore, which we didn't really talk about, this aspect of it where the standard, what we think of as an isekai anime, meaning an anime about a regular person in our world who's usually some sort of, like, overworked salary guy or some, like, super depressed high school boy who dies, gets run over by a truck, whatever, and ends up resurrected in a parallel fantasy world where they're super ridiculously powerful and they get to live out that power fantasy, right? That's the sort of standard trope. And here in Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, it is instead about our, like, standard overworked office worker person staying in our world, and somebody from a parallel fantasy world who seems to be someone with all the power coming to our world and finding something that they need in the mundanity of the ordinary existence that we enjoy. And I think that's part of the thing I like about the tone and the mishmash of this show, and what Kobayashi as a really interesting protagonist brings, what Toru as this like fun fantasy character brings, is it reflects on our sort of desires for certain kinds of fantasies, but it also reflects on the beauty of the life that we have and that we often don't see, and that Kobayashi fails to see before she has Toru come into it. And to me, that's part of, like, with Takemoto Yasuhiro, that's such a running theme in so much of his work, because I think it's a celebration of what it is to be an otaku. It's a celebration of what it is to be someone who finds joy and pleasure and fulfillment in small things in your daily life. Little things like watching an anime or reading a manga or playing a video game. Being part of those kinds of communities and finding connection over those sorts of things are often belittled, but they are things that bring real meaning. And I think that this show and the tone of this show is such a great exploration of that dynamic in its own very weird sort of metaphorical way. And it's something that I've always liked about Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, and just that experience was very heightened revisiting it with all the context we had of watching through all this stuff ahead of it.
I 100% agree. And, that first season, it was not intended to be, and it should not have had to be, a career summation for Takemoto Yasuhiro. And yet it works as one, sadly and unfortunately, but it is a beautiful summation and a funny and just of all the things he could do as a director. It's not necessarily my favorite show he made, but it is, if you wanted to point towards what was the Takemoto Yasuhiro touch, Miss Kobayashi's Maid Dragon is the Takemoto Yasuhiro touch.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's, you just got to pour one out, because he was just such an amazing creator and director and artist. It's so sad that he's gone, but, he left so many amazing things behind, and some of them that we haven't covered. And I hope that people go back and watch some of the stuff that we didn't do here, because it would have required too much, like, ancillary watching to do with, like, Full Metal Panic stuff. But all that stuff is phenomenal as well. So it's sad to say goodbye, but his stuff was just amazing and will live on forever.
Well, and speaking of goodbye, Sean, we are being called. We're at the gate, and we're going to be getting on the plane. Luckily, the other passengers on this plane back to America have told us we can record a podcast in the air, and they'll all stay quiet. So that's what we're going to do on the flight home to America. So, Sean, what are we going to be recording as our final episode on the flight home?
A lot of fun stuff. We haven't even laid out exactly everything we're doing, but we've got one last episode. As we're coming home, we've got an epilogue, a looking back, a reflection to do. We have watched, Jonathan, a lot of fucking anime made by Kyoto Animation, more than we intended to. And
way more.
Way more. And it's time that we stopped and took a moment as we're taking our long flight back to the United States of America to reflect and look back and kind of see what were our favorites, what were the things that stood out, what are our big memories, and we've just got a lot of fun stuff to be able to look back on to wrap up Japanimation Station's Kyoto Vacation.
"だから夫婦として